Welcome to Audiosaar, where every day you can listen to a new book. Today, we journey to the quiet, winding lanes of Kasauli, a small town nestled in the Himalayan foothills. It's a place where pine-scented air whispers through colonial-era bungalows, a place where time seems to slow down. But even in the most peaceful corners of the world, hearts can shatter. This is a story about the tales we tell ourselves, the grand romances, the funny anecdotes, the tragedies. It's about what happens when the story you thought you were living is ripped apart, forcing you to find a new one. It is a story of heartbreak, unexpected alliances, and the quiet courage it takes to start a new chapter when you feel like your book has already been written. Chapter 1: 110 Days, Until I Can Leave. Some people are born storytellers. They have a natural gift for it, knowing just how to weave a narrative, where to pause for effect, which details to embellish, and which to quietly omit. They can hold an audience captive with the simplest of tales. I, on the other hand, am not one of them. I am an archivist. My love is for stories that are already written, catalogued, and safely stored on a shelf. I preserve the past, I don't perform it. If I had a rupee for every time I've derailed my own anecdote to clarify whether it happened on a Monday or a Wednesday, I'd have enough for a cup of chai, but not much more. It's a frustrating habit, this need for factual accuracy in a world that just wants a good yarn. Rohan, my ex-fiancé, was the exact opposite. Rohan could sell ice to a Himalayan hermit. He had 0 rupees from derailing his own stories and an audience that hung on his every word. I especially loved the way he told our story, the story of how we met. It was 3 years ago, during the brief, glorious Delhi spring, before the scorching heat of summer settled in. We lived in Hauz Khas village then, our apartments separated by a handful of winding lanes. His, a sleek modern space in a newly renovated building, and mine, a slightly shabby but charming barsati with a view of the lake. One Saturday morning, I was on my way home from the local archives, my arms laden with a stack of antique books I probably shouldn't have brought home. The air was perfect, filled with the scent of jasmine and street food, so I took a detour through the deer park. It was something I never did. The park was usually too crowded for my liking. I was also wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat, another thing I never did. My mother had couriered it to me the week before, a not-so-subtle hint that I should protect my skin from the Delhi sun, and I felt I owed it to her to at least try it. I was trying to read the spine of the top book as I walked, a terrible habit I'd sworn to break after nearly walking into a scooter just weeks earlier, when a sudden, warm gust of wind caught the brim of my hat. It lifted from my head, a clumsy bird taking flight, and sailed over a bed of marigolds. It landed right at the feet of a tall, handsome man with kind eyes and a smile that could melt glaciers. Rohan. He always said this moment felt like an invitation from the universe. He'd laugh, a little self-deprecatingly, and add, "I never believed in destiny before that day." If it was destiny, then destiny clearly has a wicked sense of humor. Because as he bent down to retrieve my hat, another gust of wind picked it up, sending it tumbling toward a nearby rubbish bin. I lunged for it, and collided squarely with the bin. The hard, metal kind, bolted to the concrete path. My brand new hat landed softly atop a pile of discarded Momo wrappers. The rim of the bin slammed into my ribs, and I let out a wheezing gasp before stumbling backward into the grass. Rohan always described this as adorably clumsy. He conveniently left out the part where I let out a string of curses that would make a sailor blush. I fell in love with Ananya the moment I looked up from her hat, he'd say, with no mention of the chutney stains that were now probably in my hair. When he rushed over to ask if I was okay, the first thing I managed to say was, "Did I run over a deer?" He thought I'd hit my head. The truth was, I was just terrible at first impressions. Over the next 3 years, Rohan polished and perfected our story. He told it at parties, to our parents, to new friends. I was certain he'd work it into his wedding speech, maybe even our vows. But then, his pre-wedding trip to Goa happened, and everything changed. The story wasn't ours anymore. It was just a minor plot point in a much longer, more epic tale. In this new version, I wasn't the romantic lead. I was the quirky obstacle, the funny little anecdote they'd tell their friends for years to come. Ananya Sharma, the quiet archivist Rohan nearly married before he realized, on the eve of his wedding, that he was actually in love with his platonic best friend, Priya Khanna. Not that they'd ever need to explain their story to anyone. Everyone who knew Rohan and Priya knew their history. They'd met in kindergarten, a bond forged over a shared packet of Parle-G biscuits. Their mothers became friends during a school trip to the Rail Museum, and their fathers soon followed. For the last 25 years, the Sharmas and the Khannas had vacationed together in the hills, celebrated Diwali together, filled their homes with framed photos of their children beaming under the words, "Best friends forever." Rohan had always assured me that this made them more like cousins than anything else. As an archivist, a student of history and human patterns, I should have known better. I should have remembered all the great love stories, the epic poems where two souls, raised side by side, finally see each other for what they've always been. But I didn't. So now here I am, sitting in a tiny, borrowed apartment in Kasauli, scrolling through Priya's very public Instagram feed, a painful, high-definition reel of her new life with my ex-fiancé. From the next room, Arijit Singh's voice croons a heartbreakingly sad song, loud enough to make the small coffee table vibrate. My neighbor, Mr. Gupta, pounds on the adjoining wall. I barely notice. My attention is fixed on a photo of Rohan and Priya, flanked by both sets of their beaming parents, on a beach in the Andamans. 6 impossibly beautiful people with impossibly white smiles under the caption, "Some things are worth the wait." As if on cue, the music gets louder. I slam my laptop shut, the sound echoing in the quiet room. I peel myself off the threadbare sofa. This apartment building is old, from a time when the hills of Himachal were always cool, when air conditioning was an unheard-of luxury. But it's only the 1st of May, and the afternoon sun turns the small space into a brick oven. I walk to the short hallway and knock on the closed door at the end. The music is too loud, he can't hear me. I escalate my knock to a pound. The music stops abruptly. There's a shuffle of footsteps, and the door swings open. A thick cloud of fragrant smoke, sweet and earthy, wafts out. My new roommate stands there, his dark brown eyes ringed with pink. He's wearing nothing but a pair of faded boxer shorts and a colorful hand-knitted shawl draped over his shoulders like a very sad, very tired superhero cape. Given the sweltering heat in our apartment, I can only assume the shawl is for modesty. A bit much, considering that just last night, he completely forgot I lived here, and took a full shower with the bathroom door wide open. His dark hair is a chaotic mess, sticking up in every direction. His beard is equally untamed. He clears his throat. "Hey, is everything okay?" I ask. I'm used to a disheveled Kabir, but I'm not used to him blasting the world's most depressing songs on a loop. "Yep," he says, his voice a low rumble. "All good." Could you turn the music down a bit?" I ask. "I'm not listening to music," he says, his expression completely serious. "Well, you just paused it," I say gently, in case he's genuinely too high to recall the last 5 seconds. But it was really loud. He frowns, scratching his eyebrow with the back of a knuckle. "I'm watching a movie," he says. "But yeah, I can turn it down. Sorry about that." Without meaning to, I find myself peering over his shoulder, trying to see into his room. Unlike the rest of the apartment, which was impeccably clean when I arrived and remains so, his room is a disaster zone. Stacks of vinyl records are piled on the floor next to the milk crates they're supposed to live in. His bed is a rumpled mess of sheets and a thick razai, all untucked. A couple of old flannel shirts hang out of a dresser drawer, like limp ghosts trying to escape. In stark contrast to the neutral creams and beiges of my room, his is a warm, chaotic mix of rust orange, mustard yellow, and deep 70s green. Where my few books are neatly arranged on a small shelf, his are scattered, face down and spine cracked, on the floor. His desk is a jumble of loose tools, wires, and an open bag of spicy banana chips. On his windowsill, a single stick of incense burns next to a few surprisingly healthy-looking plants. It's his television that catches my eye. On the screen, a young Shah Rukh Khan in a ridiculously oversized sweater is standing in a field of yellow flowers, arms outstretched, belting out a song. "Oh my God, Kabir," I say, a laugh bubbling up despite myself. "What?" he asks a little defensively. "You're watching Dilwale Dulhania Le Jayenge. It's a classic," he cries out, his defensiveness growing. "It's a great movie," I agree, "but this scene is, 2 minutes long," he sniffs. So why has it been playing on a loop for the last 10 minutes? I check my phone for emphasis. His dark eyebrows knit together in confusion. "Did you need something, Ananya? Could you just please turn it down?" I repeat. The plates in the kitchen are rattling and Mr. Gupta is trying to break through the wall. Another sniff. "You want to watch?" he offers, his voice softening. In there, the room looks like a tetanus risk. It's an uncharitable thought, I know, but my supply of charity has been running on empty lately. That's what happens when the love of your life leaves you for the kindest, sunniest, most beautiful woman in the entire state of Himachal Pradesh. I'm good, I tell him. Thanks. Stand there for a moment, in the longest, most awkward silence of our short acquaintance. This is the most we've ever interacted. I'm about to break my own record for sustained conversation. My throat feels tight, my eyes burn. And I add, my voice barely a whisper, could you please not smoke inside? I should have asked sooner, but technically this is his apartment. He did me a massive favor by letting me move in. Then again, it wasn't like he had a lot of options. His girlfriend had just moved out into my apartment with my fiancé. He needed someone to cover Priya's half of the rent. I needed a place to sleep. Did I say sleep? I meant weep, but it's been 3 weeks. I'm tired of showing up to the museum smelling like I just came from a music festival in the Parvati Valley. I stick my head out the window, Kabir says, his expression still serious. What? I say, picturing a large golden retriever with its head out of a car window, ears flapping in the wind. The few times I'd met Kabir before all of this, on awkward double dates with our now coupled exes, that's what he'd reminded me of. Friendly, a bit lanky, with a slightly upturned nose that gave him a playful look, and teeth that were surprisingly perfect against his scruffy face. The past few weeks have given him a slightly wild edge, a golden retriever who's been through a rough patch and ended up back at the shelter. It's a look I can relate to, honestly. I stick my head out the window when I smoke, he clarifies. Okay, I say, that's all I can manage. I turn to go back to my room. You sure you don't want to watch the movie? He calls after me. Oh God, the truth is, Kabir seems like a nice guy, a genuinely nice guy. And I can only imagine that the emotional devastation he's feeling must be on par with my own. I could accept his offer. I could go sit on his unmade bed, watch a classic romantic movie, and passively absorb a lungful of smoke. Maybe it would even be nice for a little while to pretend we're friends instead of two strangers trapped in this shared nightmare. But I have better ways to spend my Wednesday night. Maybe some other time, I say, my voice softer than I intend. I return to my laptop, to the endless scrolling through job portals in cities far, far away from Rohan and Priya, and far away from Kasauli. I wonder if they need an archivist in Antarctica. 110 days. Then I'm gone. The thought is a small, cold comfort, a single candle in the overwhelming darkness. But as I close my eyes, I can't shake the image of Shah Rukh Khan, arms outstretched in a field of flowers, and the hollow ache in my chest feels a little bit deeper. Chapter 2. Back in April. Before I knew I needed a countdown. Here's how the rest of the story goes, when I'm the one telling it. Rohan Mehra and I fell in love on a spring day in a Delhi park. When the wind stole my hat and delivered it to him, I am, by all accounts, terrible at small talk, but he didn't seem to want small talk. When I told him the hat was a gift from my mother, he didn't just nod politely. He wanted to know if we were close where she lived, what the occasion for the gift was. Happy belated birthday, by the way, he'd said with that easy smile. Are you a birthday person? And when I'd answered, thank you and yes, I absolutely am, he'd told me he was too. That his family always treated birthdays not just as a marker of time, but as a major personal accomplishment, something to be celebrated with gusto. And when I'd told him that sounded wonderful, his family and their birthday traditions, he'd said, they're the reason I've always wanted a big family of my own someday. At that point, I was already a goner. It didn't even matter that he'd then asked me, right there, with chutney probably still stuck in my hair, what about you? Do you want a big family? Dating in my late 20s had been a minefield of mismatched expectations and ghosting. That question was usually the conversational equivalent of a kill switch. It was as if they heard, should we skip the coffee and go freeze some embryos? But Rohan was different. He was stable, steady, and practical. He was the kind of person I felt I could trust, a feeling that did not come naturally to me. Within 6 weeks, we'd moved in together. Our lives merged seamlessly, friends, schedules, even our grocery lists. At the first birthday party I threw for him, my best friend in Delhi, Kavya, hit it off with his best friend, Samir. They started dating too. It felt like our lives were a perfectly scripted film. Within a year, Rohan proposed. I said yes, without a second's hesitation. A year after that, in the thick of wedding planning, we started looking for a house. His parents, two of the kindest people I'd ever met, sent him a listing for a beautiful old colonial-style cottage near them, in the Himachali hill station he'd grown up in, Kasauli. He'd always talked about moving back to the hills. Now that his software development job was fully remote, there was nothing stopping him. My own family was scattered. My mother was in Mumbai, and my father, a title that always felt like it needed quotation marks around it, was somewhere in Southern California. Kavya and Samir were talking about moving to Bangalore, and as much as I loved my job at the Delhi Archives, my real dream, the one I'd held close since I was a little girl, was to be the curator of a small, local museum. And as if destiny itself was writing our script, the Kasoli Historical Society was looking to hire one. So we bought the house in Kasoli. Well, he bought it. My credit was a joke and my savings were slim to none. He handled the down payment and insisted on paying the mortgage himself. Rohan had always been incredibly generous, but this felt like too much. My friend Kavya didn't get my hesitation. Let him, she'd said. Samir pays for everything. He earns 10 times what I do. But Kavya hadn't been raised by my mother, a fiercely independent woman who had taught me that relying on a man was a vulnerability you couldn't afford. So, Rohan came up with a compromise. I would be in charge of furnishing the place, of turning the house into our home, while he took care of the bills. Our wedding was planned for the summer. Most of his friends with their cushy corporate jobs could afford a separate trip for his stag party. My friends, mostly fellow archivists, librarians, and aspiring writers, couldn't, so we decided that Kavya and the others would fly in a few days before the wedding for a combined hen party and mehendi ceremony. So 3 weeks ago in early April, Rohan went out for his big night with the boys, and I stayed home in our newly acquired butter-yellow cottage, a book in my lap. For the first few hours, he sent me a stream of photos. His brother Arjun, up from Chandigarh, his school friend Vikram, with whom I'd finally bonded over a shared love for historical fiction, and a few other friends from Delhi. They all had their arms slung around each other, grinning into the camera. And in the center of every single photo was Rohan, standing next to his willowy, platinum-haired, cat-eyed goddess of a best friend, Priya Khanna. Priya's boyfriend Kabir had not been invited. Rohan didn't dislike Kabir, not exactly. He just didn't think Kabir was good enough for Priya. Kabir was a creative type without a fancy degree, who ran a small, artisanal coffee roastery. Priya, who also lacked a fancy degree, was a free spirit, not a slacker. I suppose it's different when you're a perfect 10, from a wealthy family. Another thing that must be said, Priya is preternaturally nice. She has that rare ability to make everyone she meets feel like they're the most interesting person in the room. She's always touching your arm, laughing at your jokes, insisting you try her lipstick because the shade would look so much better on you. I really, truly didn't want to be jealous of her. It made perfect sense that she was at his stag party. She was his best friend. It made sense that I wasn't there. That's just how these things worked. I'd meant to stay up until he got home, to make sure he drank some water and took a painkiller before bed. But I drifted off on the sofa, the book falling from my hands. I jolted awake to the click of the front door. The morning sun was streaming into the living room, and I could see the surprise on Rohan's face when he found me there. He looked for a split second, not like a man finding his loving fiancée, but like he'd stumbled upon an intruder who had rearranged all his furniture and adopted his pet dog. Still, the alarm bells didn't go off. It was hard to feel panicked when Rohan was near. He looked like a Bollywood hero, tall, with golden brown hair, green eyes, and a strong, noble profile. "You're back," I croaked, my voice thick with sleep, as I stood up to hug him. He was stiff in my embrace. When I pulled back, my hands still resting on the back of his neck, he gently took my wrists and unwound my arms from around him, holding my hands between us. "Can we talk for a minute?" he asked, his voice strangely formal. Of course. It came out as a question. It was one. He led me to the sofa and sat me down. Then the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The tectonic plates of my life shifted, and a loud ringing started in my ears. I could only catch fragments of what he was saying. Nothing made sense. Too much to drink, everyone went home, but we stayed back to sober up. One thing led to another. "God, Ananya, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you, but you cheated on me." I finally managed to whisper, the words catching in my throat. "No," he said a little too quickly. "I mean, it wasn't like that. She told me she's in love with me, Ananya. And I realized I'm in love with her too. I'm so sorry." More sorries, more ringing in my ears, more meaningless platitudes. He didn't cheat on me. He just confessed his undying love for another woman. I was trying to piece it all together, but none of the pieces fit. Every sentence he uttered contradicted the last. Finally, one word cut through the fog: a week. "A week," I repeated, my voice hollow. He nodded. "She's waiting for me now. We're going to leave right away to give you some space while you figure things out. A week, I said again, still not understanding. I looked online. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to me. Some delusional part of me thought it might be a letter, an apology, something that could make this salvageable. Instead, it was a printout of local apartment listings. "You're moving out," I choked out the words. A flush crept up his neck. His eyes darted toward the door. "Well, no," he said, his voice barely audible. "The house is in my name, so," he trailed off, leaving me to fill in the horrifying blank. "Are you kidding me, Rohan?" I jumped to my feet. The hurt hadn't hit yet, that would come later. Right now it was pure, unadulterated rage. He stood too, his perfect eyebrows shooting up toward his hairline. "We didn't mean for this to happen." "Of course she meant for this to happen," I screamed, my voice cracking. "She had 25 years to tell you she was in love with you and she chose last night. She didn't realize," he said, his voice defensive. He was protecting her. "You brought me here." I was half screaming, half laughing a deranged, hysterical laugh. "I left my friends, my job, my entire life." "I feel terrible," he said, looking anywhere but at me. "You have no idea." "I have no idea how bad you feel," I demanded. "Where am I supposed to go?" He gestured vaguely at the apartment listings, now crumpled on the floor. "Look," he said, his voice taking on a placating tone. "We're going out of town for a week. To give you space. We won't be back until next Sunday." Back? Oh God, it wasn't just that I had to move out, she was moving in. After they returned from their romantic getaway, a trip he was pitching to me as some kind of favor. "I'm really sorry, Ananya," he said, and then he had the audacity to lean in and kiss my forehead, like a benevolent father figure sending his child off to boarding school. I shoved him away, hard. His eyes widened in shock for a moment, before his expression settled back into one of solemn regret. He turned and walked to the door, empty-handed, as if everything he could possibly need was already waiting for him outside. As the door clicked shut, something inside me snapped. I grabbed a large, unopened jar of wedding almonds, a gift from his mother, and ran outside, still in the silk pajamas he'd bought me for my last birthday. He cast a wild-eyed look over his shoulder as he climbed into the passenger seat of Priya's open-top Jeep. She kept her face pointed resolutely forward. "You are such an asshole," I screamed and hurled a handful of almonds at him. He yelped as they pelted his car. I threw another handful, then another. Priya started the engine. I chased them down the driveway, throwing the entire jar at the retreating vehicle. It bounced off a tire and skittered to the side of the road as they sped off into the sunrise. "Where am I supposed to go?" I whispered to the empty road, sinking onto the dew-damp grass of their front lawn. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity. Then I went back inside and cried until I thought I might be sick. I hadn't eaten since the previous afternoon. Rohan was always very particular about his diet, low carbs, high protein. I rummaged through our sparsely stocked kitchen cabinets and found a packet of Maggi noodles. Just as the water started to boil, someone started pounding on the front door. For a foolish, hopeful second, I thought it was him, that he'd come back. But when I opened the door, I found Kabir, red-eyed and disheveled. In his hand he held a 3-sentence note, brandished like a weapon. The note Priya had left for him on their coffee table. "Is she here?" he asked, his voice thick. "No." A strange numbness washed over me. I threw some almonds at them and they drove away. He nodded, the sorrow on his face deepening. "Shit," he rasped, slumping against the doorframe. I swallowed the lump in my throat, a knot that felt like barbed wire. Or maybe it was the first stirrings of that Vincent family practicality, the one my mother had passed down to me, the ability to channel pain into action. "Kabir," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. He looked up, a sliver of hope in his wrecked expression. "How many bedrooms does your apartment have?" I asked. The question hung in the air between us, a fragile lifeline in the wreckage of our lives. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a confusion that slowly, painfully, began to morph into understanding. And in that moment, a strange and terrible alliance was forged, not out of friendship, but out of the shared, bitter ashes of our love stories. The air was still and quiet, but for me, a countdown had just begun. A countdown to escape. Chapter 3, 91 Days Until I Can Leave. Honestly, Kabir Ahuja is a good roommate. All things considered. Apart from the occasional, mumbled offer to watch a movie, or a text asking if I need anything from the market, he mostly leaves me alone. After I asked him to smoke outside, he must have started doing more than just sticking his head out the window, because weeks pass without that sweet, earthy smell lingering in the hallway. The mournful Arijit Singh concerts have also ceased. In fact, most of the time, he seems completely fine. If I hadn't seen his face on that first day, shattered and hollow, I would never have guessed he was a man nursing a broken heart. We fell into a bathroom schedule without ever discussing it. He's a night owl, and I'm an early riser, usually up by 6:30 whether I have the morning shift at the museum or not. He's also rarely home, which means no stacks of dirty dishes left soaking in the sink. But the apartment itself is tiny. My bedroom is little more than a glorified storage closet. In fact, that's what Priya had used it for when she lived here. A year ago, the cramped space wouldn't have bothered me. I'd always been a minimalist, a habit born of necessity. After my parents separated, my mother and I moved frequently, chasing her bank promotions from one city to another. We never had movers, just whichever of her colleagues was trying to win her favor at the time. I learned to travel light. Books were my only vice, but even then, I was more interested in absorbing their stories than in owning them. Libraries were my sanctuaries. I remember once, before a move in high school, I convinced my mother to have a ceremonial burning of all my old report cards and a plus papers she'd saved on our fridge. As I tossed them into our small gas fireplace, I saw her eyes well up with tears. It was the only time I'd ever seen her cry. She was my best friend, my hero, but she wasn't a soft woman. I had always thought of her as invincible. That night, watching my old physics test curl and blacken, she'd whispered, her voice thick, "Oh, Ananya, who am I going to be when you go off to college?" "You'll still be you," I'd told her, snuggling closer. "The best mum in the world." She kissed the top of my head. "Sometimes I wish I'd held on to a little more." "It's just stuff," I'd reminded her, repeating her own mantra back to her. Life, I had learned, was a revolving door. Friends, apartments, the boys who swore they'd write, they all came and went. The only permanent thing in my life was my mother. The only thing that truly mattered. Then I met Rohan, and we moved into the little yellow cottage in Kasauli. He'd carried me over the threshold and said the three words that had undone years of carefully cultivated detachment. "Welcome home, Ananya." Just like that, something inside me had relaxed. The walls I'd built around my heart had crumbled. I had carried my life like a small, neat bundle, ready to move at a moment's notice. I never knew what I was running from until he'd said that word. Home. It had felt like the permanence I'd been searching for my entire life. And so, my minimalism had vanished. I'd filled that house with things: furniture, art, rugs, cushions. I had been building a nest. Now all of that, the contents of a 3-bedroom house, was crammed into Kabir's tiny spare room. My room. Furniture was pushed up against furniture, my bed was buried under a mountain of throw pillows. I should have left it all behind, but I felt too guilty about the money I'd spent on a home that was never truly mine. And then there was the wedding paraphernalia. The boxes of decorations, the favors, and the dress. The dress hung in my small closet, a constant, heavy reminder. A ghost of a life that never was. In theory, I planned to sell it all online, but that would require thinking about the wedding, and I'm not there yet. I've spent the first part of my Saturday shift at the museum trying to push all thoughts of the wedding that wasn't out of my mind. Then my phone buzzes. A text from Kabir. Working, it's how he texts. Abbreviations, no punctuation, and very little context. Is he asking me or telling me? It makes no sense. I have a whiteboard calendar in the kitchen where my schedule is meticulously detailed. Yep, I text back. Another text comes through. You want Chinese, an implied question mark, I assume. I'm good, thanks. On Saturdays, I treat myself to a burrito from one of the food stalls near the museum. I'll be full for hours. He writes back. Then the 3 little dots appear. He's typing something else, then stops. Is he waiting for me to offer to pick up his Chinese food on my way home? Anything else? I type. He replies, I'll just see you when you get home. Strange. On Saturdays, he's usually out for the night by the time I get home. My phone vibrates again, but it's just my 10-minute reminder for the children's history walk. I gather my materials and head to the museum's small auditorium. A group of kids and their parents are already gathering, their excited voices echoing in the high-ceilinged room. A chorus of Ananya Ditty rises as I approach. A little girl with 2 pigtails tells me proudly, "I'm 4. I tell her that's fantastic and ask her how old she thinks I am. She considers for a moment, her brow furrowed, then declares, 100. Last week she said I was a teenager, so I guess we're moving in the wrong direction. Before I can respond, a little boy named Arav, who I have never seen in anything other than a Spider-Man costume, launches himself at my knees in a fierce hug. No matter how dark my mood, the history walk always helps. Arav's mother, Huma, gently peels him off me. They are two of my favorite regulars. He is endlessly curious, and she has a wonderful way of encouraging his spirit while maintaining gentle boundaries. Seeing them together always makes my heart ache a little. It reminds me of my own mother. It reminds me of the life I thought I would have with Rohan, and the family I thought we would build. I shake off the melancholy and settle into my chair. Who here likes stories about kings and queens? I ask to a chorus of cheers. And what about stories about brave warriors and magical creatures? The cheers get even louder. The hour flies by. I get so lost in the stories of ancient India that I only remember I'm at work when I finish the last tale. As I'm packing up, Ashley, the museum's formidable events coordinator, emerges from the back office. Ashley is tiny, but she has the presence of a giant. She embodies the stereotype of the scary, shushing librarian, even though we work in a museum. Her voice is a force of nature, and she once told me she doesn't mind confrontation in a tone that made me wonder if we were having one at that very moment. I admire and fear her in equal measure. "You good to lock up?" she asks, texting without looking up. Ashley is always late and always leaves early. I have to pick up Mulder from his tabla class. Yes, her son is named after David Duchovny's character from the X-Files. And yes, every time I remember that, a small part of me dies. I am now old enough to have a child named Mulder. Instead, I'm single, living with a stranger in a town where I know no one outside of my work colleagues and my ex-fiancé's entire social circle. "Yep," I tell her, "you go ahead." She nods and she's gone. On the drive home, I call my mother. We've started having shorter, more frequent calls lately. I tell her about the planning for the museum's end-of-summer Heritage Festival, 91 days to go. She tells me about her new obsession with a Zumba class. I tell her about a 70-year-old patron who asked me for dating advice, and she tells me about the 28-year-old personal trainer at her gym who keeps trying to ask her out. We lead such similar lives, I muse as I park my car. "Love you," I tell her as I get out. "Love you more," she says quickly, and hangs up before I can argue. It's a game she's played for as long as I can remember. Kabir's apartment is on the third floor of an old, renovated warehouse on the edge of town, in an area the locals call Butcher Town. I assume it was once the city's meatpacking district. By the time I climb the stairs and reach our front door, I'm sweating. Inside, I drop my bag and check the whiteboard calendar. The only new addition is the book club meeting I agreed to host on Thursday. I grab a glass of water and chug it down. As I wander into the living room, a sudden movement makes me yelp, sloshing water onto the rug. It's just Kabir. He's lying face down on the sofa, completely motionless. "You look dead," I tell him, my heart still racing. He groans into the cushions. "I wish," he mumbles. I eye the bottle of Old Monk rum on the coffee table next to an empty glass. Rough day. It's a strange relief to see him looking the way I've been feeling for the past month and a half. Without lifting his head, he fumbles for a piece of paper on the table and holds it up. I walk over and take the elegant, off-white card from his hand. I start to read the beautiful script. "Mr. and Mrs. Mehra along with Mr. and Mrs. Khanna joyfully invite you to celebrate the marriage of their children, Rohan and P. No." I fling the invitation away from me as if it's on fire. Suddenly, the room is unbearably hot. I fan myself with my hands. "No," I say again, my voice shaking. "This can't be real." Kabir sits up slowly. "Oh, it's real," he says, his voice rough. "You got one too. Why would they invite us?" I demand of him, of the universe. He pours more rum into his glass and holds it out to me. When I shake my head, he downs it in one go. I snatch the invitation from the floor, my hands trembling. "This is Labor Day weekend," I shriek, throwing it down again. "I know," Kabir says, his voice flat. "They couldn't just ruin our lives, they had to ruin a long weekend too." "I mean this Labor Day," I say, my voice rising with hysteria. "That's only a month after our wedding was supposed to be." Kabir looks at me, a flicker of something, pity, concern, in his eyes. "Ananya," he says, his voice gentle. "I think that ship sailed when he cheated on you with my girlfriend. I feel like I can't breathe. Why would they get married so fast? We had a 2-year engagement." Kabir shudders as he swallows more rum. "Maybe she's pregnant." The room spins. I sink onto the sofa next to him. He fills his glass again, and this time when he offers it to me, I take it and down it. The rum burns its way down my throat. Oh my God, I choke out. That's disgusting. I know, he says. It's all I had. Should we switch to wine? I look at him surprised. I didn't peg you for a wine guy. He stares at me, his eyes narrowing. You can't be serious. I work at a coffee roastery, Ananya, he says, a note of disbelief in his voice. Since when? For the last 5 years, he says. What did you think I did? I don't know, I say, feeling foolish. I thought you were a musician or something. Why? He asks, shaking his head. I don't know, can I just have some wine? He gets up and goes to the kitchen. I watch him open a cupboard I've never seen him use before. It's full of wine bottles. He comes back with 2 and a corkscrew. As he opens the first bottle, the rain starts, a gentle patter against the windows. Hands the entire bottle to me. No glass, I ask. You think you'll need one? He replies, working on the second bottle. My eyes drift to the expensive, mocking invitation on the floor. Guess not. He clinks his bottle against mine and takes a long drink. I do the same. You really didn't know I ran the roastery? He asks, a small, sad smile playing on his lips. No idea, I admit. Rohan made it sound like you just drifted. He never liked me. Did he? No, I say, the honesty feeling both cruel and necessary. What about Priya? Did she hate me? He frowns into his wine bottle. No, Priya likes everyone and everyone likes Priya. I don't, I say, my voice sharp. I don't like Priya at all. He looks up, a real smile finally reaching his eyes. Fair, did you ever suspect, I ask, my voice dropping, that she was into him? He nods slowly. Yeah, sometimes, but they'd been best friends forever. I couldn't compete with that history, so I just hoped it wouldn't be a problem. Somehow, that's what breaks me, the quiet resignation in his voice, the acceptance of his own defeat. The tears start to fall, hot and fast. Hey, Kabir says, moving closer. He pulls me into a rough, awkward hug, his wine bottle still in his hand. It's okay, it's fucked. He kisses the top of my head, and for the first time in weeks I don't feel completely alone in my misery. The touch is clumsy, unfamiliar, but it's real. After weeks of nothing, it feels like an anchor. As I cry into his t-shirt, which smells faintly of coffee and something spicy, a thought, sharp and unwelcome, pierces through my grief. Maybe Priya is pregnant. And as the rain falls harder outside, the thought sends a fresh wave of despair crashing over me, so powerful I'm afraid it might pull me under for good. Chapter 4. 2 hours ago, if you'd told me I'd end my night at a dimly lit, smoky bar called the Lockup, doing shots with my roommate and an old retired army major named Gil, I would have laughed in your face. The Lockup was Kabir's suggestion. I know a place, he'd said, and I was too numb and wine-soaked to argue. It was a proper Kasali institution, all dark wood, brass fittings, and the lingering smell of old stories and whiskey. Major Gil had taken an immediate liking to us. He'd overheard Kabir putting a classic Kishore Kumar song on the old jukebox, and had sidled up to our table, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He'd asked us how we met, assuming, like everyone else in the world, that we were a couple. Without a moment's hesitation, Kabir had looked him straight in the eye and said, "The love of my life ran off with her fiancé." This stark, unvarnished truth had, for some reason, inspired a torrent of alcohol-based charity from the major. For the rest of the night, he regaled us with tales from his army days, stories of daring escapes, lifelong friendships, and the one time he'd accidentally set his commanding officer's tent on fire. I watched, mesmerized, as Kabir, who I'd previously thought of as quiet and reserved, expertly drew the man's life story out of him. For someone like me, who considered a successful social interaction to be one that didn't end in awkward silence, watching Kabir was like witnessing an artist at work. It was impressive, and a little dizzying. The major kept buying us rounds. The bartender, a young woman with a nose ring and a tattoo of a lotus on her arm, bought us a round. By the time last call was announced, Major Gil was pressing a 500 rupee note into Kabir's hand for a taxi home. "Stay strong, kids," he'd said, clapping a hand on each of our shoulders, before turning and giving the bartender a jaunty salute. The rain had stopped by the time we stumbled out of the lockup. The night was cool and clear, the mountain air crisp. We decided to walk home, a drunken, zigzagging journey, my arm around his waist and his slung over my shoulder, like two old friends staggering home after a long night, instead of two newly minted allies united by heartbreak. "Does that happen to you a lot?" I asked, my words slurring slightly. "What?" "The free drinks," I clarified. "The life story from a complete stranger." He shrugged. Sometimes. How often do you get free drinks, Kabir? He shot me a bemused look. It's a friendly town. The lockup, I asked, incredulous. Butcher town, he corrected. A wave of drunken realization washed over me. Oh, that's why it's called the lockup. I spent the whole night trying to figure out if it was some kind of theme bar. Kabir threw his head back and laughed, a deep, genuine sound that echoed in the quiet street. You thought I took you to a theme bar? He asked, looking delighted. What did Rohan tell you I was into some weird stuff? Wait, are you? I asked, my curiosity piqued. Not that I know of, he said, a grin still playing on his lips. Why are you? Probably not, I admitted. I think I'm pretty boring in that department. The sex department, he said, his voice laced with amusement. This is none of your business, I said, feeling a flush creep up my neck. You brought it up, he reminded me. We'd reached our building. He held the door open for me and we started the slow, careful climb up the stairs. I don't just lie there and stare at the ceiling if that's what you're asking, I said a little defensively. I make direct, unblinking eye contact like a respectable woman. See, he said, gesturing for me to go ahead of him. Not boring, a little terrifying maybe, but not boring. But how do you do it? I asked, changing the subject back. The free drinks, the instant friends. He shrugged again. I don't know, I'm a good tipper. Bartenders remember that. I work in the service industry too. I think they can smell it on me, that I'm one of them. Does it smell like coffee and cardamom? I asked, my voice getting even more slurred as we climbed. That's what he smelled like. A warm, spicy, comforting scent. He stopped outside our apartment door, a chuckle rumbling in his chest. Coffee and cardamom. I waved a hand dismissively and tried to fit my key into the lock. The door seemed to have sprouted 2 extra keyholes. After a few failed attempts, he gently nudged me aside, took the key from my hand and tried himself. He missed on the first try and we both dissolved into a fit of giggles. We stumbled against each other, our laughter getting louder, until our elderly neighbor, Mr. Gupta, poked his head out of his door and hissed, Some of us are trying to sleep. Sorry, Mr. Gupta, Kabir said, trying to stifle his laughter. We finally managed to get the door open and tumbled inside, leaning against it to catch our breath. I feel like we're in a spy movie, he whispered, his voice still shaking with laughter, like we just escaped a laser grid. I don't think Mr. Gupta's laser-like stare poses that much of a threat, I whispered back. You know what I think, he said, his voice suddenly serious. What? I think we should just do it. My heart skipped a beat. My skin went from hot to cold in a split second. Do what? Let's RSVP, he said, his eyes gleaming in the dim light of the hallway. Let's go to their wedding. Get ridiculously drunk. Eat the cake before they even cut it. Cause a scene. I laughed, the sound a little hysterical. No way. Okay, fine, he said. Then let's just say we're going. Why? I asked. To make them sweat, he said. And to make them pay for 2 plates of dry chicken biryani that no one's going to eat. Their parents will pay for it, I reminded him. And Rohan's parents are lovely. They're also rich, he countered. And at least this way they'll spend the next few months wondering if we're going to show up and ruin everything. I considered it for a moment. The petty, vengeful part of me, a part I didn't know I had until recently, was intrigued. You know why they invited us, Kabir, I said, a bitter taste in my mouth. Because they need to be loved, by everyone, even the people whose hearts they've just shattered. They think they're being the bigger people, but they don't get to be the bigger people. Not this time. He looked at me, a slow smile spreading across his face. We should RSVP, I said, my voice filled with a newfound drunken conviction. Fuck them for thinking they can be the bigger people. Fuck them, he agreed, his voice a low whisper. Mr. Gupta pounded on the wall again. Kabir pressed a finger to my lips. Fuck them, he whispered again, his eyes dancing. Fuck them, I whispered back, my lips moving against his finger. I felt a surprising jolt of electricity at the touch. We should go to bed, I said, my voice suddenly husky. I mean, I should go to bed. He let his hand fall away. After we RSVP. I woke up the next morning to the bright glare of the midday sun, and a headache that felt like a tiny man was playing the drums inside my skull. The events of the previous night came back to me in fragmented, confusing flashes. The smoky bar, Major Gill's stories, the drunken walk home, laughing in the hallway, red wine straight from the bottle, and then something else. A vague, unsettling memory, RSVPing to the wedding. I fumbled for my phone, my heart pounding in my chest. I scrolled through my sent emails, a sense of dread washing over me, and there it was. An email to Rohan's mother sent at 2 in the morning. Subject: You're invited. Dear Mrs. Mehra, thank you so much for the kind invitation. Kabir and I would be delighted to attend. Warmly, Ananya, I groaned, letting my head fall back against my pillow. What had we done? As if on cue, my phone started ringing. I looked at the screen and my blood ran cold. Rohan. All at once, another memory from the night before slammed into me, a memory so outrageous, so utterly insane that it couldn't possibly be real. But as the phone continued to ring, a horrifying certainty began to dawn. I really, really wished it wasn't. Chapter 5, 90 Days Until I Can Leave. I let the phone ring, my mind racing. I didn't have to answer. But this was the first time Rohan had called in weeks. The thought of not knowing what he wanted to say, of letting it hang in the air forever, was almost as bad as the thought of actually talking to him. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and answered on the last ring. "Hello," I said, my voice coming out as a dry croak. "Ananya." Rohan's voice was smooth, familiar, and it sent a pang of something I didn't want to name through my chest. "Yes." There was a pause. "You sound different." "I feel different," I replied, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I had no idea why I said it. "Oh," he said, a note of confusion in his voice. Another long, awkward silence. "So," I finally said, desperate to fill the void. "So I got your RSVP." It was a question, not a statement. I pressed the heel of my hand against my throbbing forehead. "Yes, and I guess I just wanted to make sure everything was okay." "Okay," I repeated, the word sounding foreign. "Yeah. I mean," he took a breath. "You don't have to come, you know." A harsh, humorless laugh escaped me. "I mean, of course we'd love to have you," he said quickly, the word we like a physical blow. "We used to be we. I just wanted to make sure you knew there was no pressure on our end." The words dripped with a condescending pity that made my skin crawl. The worst part was, even after everything, a small, treacherous part of me wasn't sure I didn't still love him. Not this version of him, but the one who remembered my favorite kind of tea, who brought me soup when I was sick, the one whose steady presence had been the anchor of my life. The parts of him that now belonged to her. "We know how hard this must be for you," he was saying now, his voice dripping with faux sympathy, and just like that, he snapped back into the person I was beginning to truly hate. "And I hate to think of you there, all on your own." He was calling to make sure I knew he felt sorry for me. The humiliation was a burning fire in my gut. "I won't be alone," I said, my voice sharp. "I mean without a date," he clarified as if I were a complete idiot. "I know what you meant," I said, "and I'm bringing my boyfriend." The words were out of my mouth before my brain could stop them. A voice in my head screamed, "What are you doing? Your boyfriend?" Rohan's voice was filled with sheer disbelief. "Yes," my mouth said, seemingly of its own accord. "But you didn't RSVP for a +1. Not a liar. It's not in my nature." But apparently some mischievous demon had taken up residence in my soul because another lie, fully formed and audacious, sprang from my lips. "I didn't need a +1. He got his own invitation." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy, pregnant with Rohan's dawning comprehension. "You can't mean?" His voice was a mixture of disbelief and outrage. "You're with Kabir." The voice in my head was now a full-blown siren. "No, no, no." "Yep," my mouth chirped happily. Another long, stunned silence. I couldn't break it. The only thing I could think to say was, "I'm so sorry, I don't know why I said that, it's a complete lie," and I couldn't bring myself to say that. Finally, Rohan cleared his throat. "Well, the wedding's not for a few months." "I know," I said, my voice betraying none of the panic roiling inside me. "Labor Day." "A lot can change before then," he said, the insinuation hanging in the air. He was suggesting that my fake relationship wouldn't last 3 months, when his had only started a month ago. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. "We'll be there," I said, my voice firm. "Okay," he said, his own voice now flat, defeated. "I have to go, Rohan, take care." I had to get off the phone before I spontaneously announced a fictional pregnancy. "Yeah, I hung up. I paced my small room for a few frantic seconds before marching to Kabir's door. I knocked, no answer. I pounded. "Kabir, are you awake?" I rattled the doorknob and it swung open. It wasn't locked. I stumbled into his room, catching myself on his dresser. "Are you trying to steal my record player?" a voice said from behind me. I turned, expecting to see Kabir in his bed. Instead, he was standing in the doorway, fully dressed, a paper bag in his hand. "I almost knocked it over," I explained, my voice shaky. "Why?" he asked, a look of amusement on his face. "I told Rohan we were dating," I blurted out. He stared at me for a long moment, then burst out laughing. "What does that have to do with my record player?" "Nothing," I said, feeling my cheeks burn. He laughed again and turned to go back to the kitchen. Where are you going? I called after him. To get the chili sauce, he said. Why? I asked, trailing him for my breakfast samosas. He dropped the bag on the counter. Did you hear what I said? I asked, my voice rising. You told Rohan we were dating, he confirmed, rummaging in the fridge. Aren't you mad? He turned, holding a bottle of sriracha. Why would I be mad? Because we're not dating, I'm aware. He emptied the bag onto the counter. 2 paper-wrapped samosas fell out. He pushed one towards me and turned to the already brewing coffee pot. How long have you been up? I asked. An hour or 2. He brought 2 mugs of coffee back to the counter. Cream, sugar? I shook my head. He spooned some jaggery into his own mug. Did you drunk dial him? He asked, unwrapping his samosa. No, he called me. He paused, the samosa halfway to his mouth. Another laugh escaped him. Wait, did we actually RSVP last night? The full weight of our drunken mistake hit me again. I groaned and dropped my head onto my arms on the counter. Wait. Kabir gently tipped my face up. So he called because he got the RSVP. I nodded miserably. He called to tell me I didn't have to come, that he knew how hard it would be for me to be there, all alone and heartbroken. Kabir snorted, smug bastard. He's 6'2", I said, for no reason at all. Smug, tall bastard, he amended. Then after a moment, or maybe he was genuinely trying to be nice. No, you were right the first time. He pushed my samosa towards me. Eat something, you'll feel better. So he called to make you feel pathetic, he continued, a slow grin spreading across his face, and you told him we were dating. I'm so sorry, I said again. That's brilliant, he said, his eyes dancing. How did he take it? A lot of stunned silence, I said, taking a bite of the samosa. It was surprisingly delicious. And a not-so-subtle hint that there's no way we'll still be together by the wedding. I groaned again. Maybe we should date, Kabir said, his voice casual. I choked on my samosa. He watched me, a mischievous glint in his eyes. Yes, I finally managed, my voice hoarse. A shared betrayal is the perfect foundation for a lasting romance. Yeah, that, he said. And it would really piss them off. They don't care, Kabir, they're getting married. And 6 weeks ago you were getting married, he pointed out. You and Rohan were engaged, and yet he was jealous of me and you were jealous of Priya. I'm quoting you, he said, holding up his hands in surrender when I shot him a glare. From last night, after your 3rd rendition of Channa Maraya, I narrowed my eyes at him. You don't remember anything, do you? He looked delighted at the thought. My point is, he continued, just because they're engaged doesn't mean they're immune to jealousy. He took another bite of his samosa. We're not going to their wedding as a fake couple, I said firmly. He shrugged. Okay, you're not going to convince me. Fine, I'm serious. Does he still follow you on social media? He asked, changing the subject. I squirmed. I unfollowed him, but I didn't block him. A small, pathetic part of me still wanted him to see what he was missing. Can I see your phone? I don't want to block him, I said, my voice small. I'm not going to, he promised. I handed him my phone. He set down his samosa and tapped on the screen. Then he came around the counter to stand behind me, holding the phone out in front of us, the selfie camera on. He leaned over me, one arm hooking around my shoulders, and flashed a dimpled grin. What are you doing? I asked, turning towards him. My nose brushed against his cheek. Got it, he said, straightening up and handing my phone back. The picture he'd taken was still on the screen. I was mid-sentence, my face inches from his. He was smiling, his arm draped across my chest in a way that was both casual and possessive. We looked for all intents and purposes like a couple. An unlikely couple, maybe, but a couple nonetheless. What am I supposed to do with this? I asked, a feeling of unease settling in my stomach. Whatever you want. He crumpled up his samosa wrapper and tossed it in the bin. You want me to post this? I said, the realization dawning. So he'll think we're really dating. No, he said, his eyes meeting mine. I want you to post it so Priya thinks we're dating. The thought sent a thrill of something dark and exciting through me. I hesitated for only a second. Then, without a caption, without a single word of explanation, I posted the picture. Kabir grinned and gave me a high five. Are we terrible people? He asked, his voice laced with amusement. Maybe just a little bitter, I replied, a small, treacherous smile playing on my own lips. The drums in my head had subsided, replaced by a low, dangerous hum. This was a terrible, reckless, and very, very bad idea, and for the first time in a long time I didn't care. Chapter 6, 85 days until I can leave the following Friday. I'm at my desk at the museum, engaged in my least favorite task, deciding which new acquisitions to approve for the archives. Our budget is perpetually stretched thin, and it's a painful process of prioritizing and cutting, each decision feeling like a small betrayal every time I remove an item from the list. A rare collection of colonial-era letters, a set of hand-drawn maps of the region. I picture the researchers and history enthusiasts who would have loved them. I'd specifically chosen a beautiful, leather-bound book of local folklore for a young girl named Maya who visited the museum every week. She was a quiet, serious girl with braces and a reading level far beyond her years. She was shy, but we had bonded over our shared love of stories, and our conversations were the highlight of my week. The book was expensive, but I couldn't bring myself to cut it from the list. The museum director, Mr. Sharma, had left early for his daughter's graduation, so I couldn't consult with him. In the shared office, Ashley, the events coordinator, was on the phone, her voice a low, angry rumble behind the closed door. My phone buzzes. A notification from Kavya. My heart leaps, only to plummet when I see that she's only liked my most recent photo. The photo of Kabir and me, looking far more intimate than we had any right to. I tap over to Kavya's profile and immediately regret it. There, near the top of her feed, is a photo of her and Samir with Rohan and me, taken at our favorite brewery in Delhi. The one thing Rohan would break his low-carb diet for. I hate beer. Priya, of course, loves it. She's a free-spirited fantasy, and I'm a quiet archivist who unironically wears a lot of cardigans. A frustrated groan, loud enough to be heard through the office door, startles me. The door flies open and Ashley storms out, her top knot askew. Never make friends with other mothers, she declares, slumping into her chair. You're a mother, I point out. I know, she cries. Which means I get maybe one night a fortnight to myself, and every single time someone's kid gets sick or has a last-minute school project or a surprise tableau recital. Ashley, I hiss, nodding towards the group of teenagers, using the museum's computers. She shoots them a glare and they quickly turn back to their screens. I just want to go out, she says, her voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. I want to wear something other than comfortable shoes and talk about something other than Minecraft. As she's speaking, I picture my own evening plans, another night alone on the sofa, watching reruns of old sitcoms. The same way I've spent almost every night since the breakup, with the exception of my drunken outing with Kabir. Meanwhile, Rohan and Priya's social media is a constant stream of photos of them at all our old haunts, with all our old friends. His haunts, I correct myself, his friends. I had just been a temporary addition to his life, a guest star in his long-running show. The words are out of my mouth before I can stop them. I'm free tonight. Ashley stares at me, her eyes wide, as if I've just offered to donate a kidney. I'm searching for a way to retract the offer when she shrugs and says, Why not? Text me your address. I'll pick you up, there's a new brewery I want to check out. A brewery? My face pales. Yeah, in the Lower Mall area. My friend said it has a great patio. The Lower Mall, Rohan's neighborhood, there's absolutely no way I can go there. Waning Bay is small enough without me deliberately walking into the lion's den. Unless, Ashley reads the panic on my face. You had somewhere else in mind. Of course I don't. But I have to say something. First and only place that comes to mind is the Kasoli Roast. Her dark eyebrows raise. The coffee place. They serve wine in the evenings, I say, hoping I sound more confident than I feel. After a long pause, she says, Okay, the Kasoli Roast it is. She glances down at my sensible brown kurta. Are you going to wear that? A colleague and I are going to stop by the roast tonight, I tell Kabir. He's in our tiny, pink-tiled bathroom, brushing his teeth. He meets my eyes in the mirror, his mouth full of foam. Why did you say it like that? He asks after spitting into the sink. Like what? Like a threat, he says. Like you and your friend are coming to break my kneecaps. Because it is a threat, I say, trying to sound intimidating. If you're not nice to my friend, we might have to have a word with you. He rinses his mouth and dries his face on a towel. I'm always nice, he says, a playful glint in his eyes. I just thought it might be weird for me to show up without telling you, I say. I'm flattered you remember where I work, he says, a hint of a smile on his lips. I needed somewhere cool to impress Ashley, I admit, and it was the only place I could think of. Was she impressed? I don't know, I say, but she thinks one of your baristas is a drug dealer. He frowns. She must not have tried our new cold brew. A quick Google search of what to wear to a trendy Kasoli cafe yields a stream of photos of women in breezy, floral dresses and stylish sandals. My own wardrobe consists mostly of various shades of beige and brown. I could wear jeans and a t-shirt, but I suspect that would be a cardinal sin in Ashley's book. So, with a deep, fortifying breath, I pull out the one dress in my closet that doesn't scream archivist on her day off. A slinky, backless black dress I bought for my engagement party. Rohan had bought it for me, and I haven't worn it since. A knock on the door makes me jump. It's been years since I made a new friend, and I feel a ridiculous surge of 16-year-old nerves. When I open the door, Ashley is looking at her phone. "You didn't have to come all the way up," I say. "I needed to use your washroom," she says, brushing past me. "And I wanted to see if your apartment was full of spy equipment." I blink. Spy equipment. My colleague and I have a bet going on whether you're in the witness protection program. There's being private, and then there's being so private your colleagues think you've testified against the mafia. I lead her to the bathroom, and she disappears inside, probably to go through my medicine cabinet. I hear the bathroom door open, and I walk back to the living room, but Ashley isn't there. "Do you play the sitter?" she calls out from down the hallway. I follow her voice and find her not in my room, but in Kabir's. She's wandering through his chaotic space like it's a museum exhibit, her eyes wide. "This is my roommate's room," I tell her, my cheeks burning. My eyes fall on a framed photo on his dresser. It's of him and Priya, on a beach somewhere, looking young and carefree and so deeply in love it makes my heart ache. It's impossible to hate the version of her that made him so happy, until I remember that she's making Rohan that happy now. "Excuse me," Ashley says, pointing to a pair of bright yellow Crocs, peeking out from under his bed. "Does this man have a Crocs problem?" "That, and a tragic taste in music," I say, trying to steer her out of the room. My eyes catch on a wall I've never seen before, the one behind his bed. It's covered in dozens of Polaroid photos, a visual history of his relationship with Priya. 3 years of birthday cakes, holidays, trips to the beach. They look so happy. It feels like an invasion of privacy to be staring at this shrine to his lost love. "We should go," I say quickly, pulling her back into the hallway. "Definitely not witness protection," she says as we walk to the front door. My money's on Ghost Whisperer. The Kasoli roast, like most of the trendy spots in town, is housed in a renovated colonial-era building, all exposed brick, dark wood, and warm, inviting light. The air smells of coffee and freshly baked bread. Despite the pleasant weather, the inside is packed. Ashley spots 2 empty stools at the far end of the bar and weaves through the crowd to claim them. There are 2 people working behind the counter. A door swings open from a back room, and Kabir emerges, carrying a tray of coffee cups. He moves with an easy grace, a quiet confidence that I haven't seen before. He looks at home here. The warm light of the cafe softens his scruffy edges, making him look less like a heartbroken recluse and more like a ruggedly handsome artisan. He leans over the counter to talk to a pretty woman with long, dark hair, a laugh rumbling in his chest at something she says. "See," Ashley whispers, leaning closer, "hot drug dealer." My head whips around to stare at her, then back at the bar. "Kabir deals drugs," I whisper back, horrified. At the sound of his name, his head turns. His eyes meet mine, and a slow, lazy smile spreads across his face. "Wait, you know him?" Ashley asks, her eyes wide. He drops the coffee pot he's holding and walks towards us. "He's my roommate," I say quickly. He leans his forearms on the bar in front of us. "Well, well, well," he says, his voice a low, teasing rumble that sends a shiver down my spine. "If it isn't my adoring girlfriend." Ashley kicks me under the bar, her eyes practically bugging out of her head. The single glass of wine I'd had while getting ready suddenly feels like an entire bottle. The night was already off to a chaotic start, and I had a sinking feeling that things were only going to get more complicated. Chapter 7, Girlfriend. Ashley's whisper was a sharp hiss in my ear, accompanied by another swift kick to my shin. I yelped and scooted my stool away from her. "It's a joke," I said, my voice coming out a little too high. "This is my roommate Kabir. Kabir, this is my colleague Ashley." He extended a hand across the bar, his smile never faltering. "Nice to meet you." "Charmed," Ashley purred, suddenly transforming into a sophisticated socialite. "What can I get you to?" he asked, his dark eyes twinkling. Ashley propped her chin in her hand, leaning forward conspiratorially. "What do you recommend?" He slid a menu towards us. "The kitchen's closing soon, but we've still got a few things." He circled a couple of small plates and then flipped the menu over, pointing to a wine flight. He looked to me for approval. I looked at Ashley. She gave a dramatic nod. "Whatever Kabir says," she declared. "I'll be right back," he promised, disappearing into the back room. Ashley immediately swiveled on her stool to face me. "So, what's this hilarious joke about you being his girlfriend? What's this about my roommate being a drug dealer? I countered, trying to deflect. She waved a dismissive hand. That's just what I call him in my head. He has the aesthetic. The selling mystery powders in a dark alley aesthetic. More like the has at least 3 illegal plants growing in his apartment aesthetic, she clarified. But that was before I saw his room. Now I have to completely reevaluate his entire persona in my brain palace. You mean memory palace? My turn to ask the questions. Her eyes danced with mischievous curiosity. I hadn't seen this side of Ashley before. It was a little intimidating, but it also reminded me of Kavya, and a sharp pang of longing shot through me. Tell me about the joke, she pressed. The one where you're hot Kabir's girlfriend. Hello, ladies. A cheerful voice made us both jump. Another barista, a young woman with a curtain of fringe bangs, was smiling at us. Kabir will be right back with your food, but can I get you anything else? She filled 2 water glasses and set them in front of us. We both shook our heads. Well, I'm Katia if you need anything, she said with a wink before sauntering off. So, Ashley prompted, turning her attention back to me. The joke? It was just about this picture. I reluctantly pulled out my phone and showed her the photo of Kabir and me, the one where I looked like I was about to lick his face. It was more suggestive than I remembered. My stomach did a nervous flip. Ashley stared at it, a small frown forming on her lips. Because you look like a couple, that's the whole joke. I grimaced, debating how much to tell her. This was my problem. I didn't know how to do surface-level conversation, but I also didn't want to dredge up all the ugly details of my life for someone who might just be a temporary fixture in it. Ashley set my phone down. Look, she said, her voice softening. If you don't want to be friends, I'm not going to force you. We've worked together for a year and I've learned almost nothing about you. I can tell when someone's a closed book. I'm not a closed book, I protested weakly. But I can't figure out why you asked me to hang out tonight. She continued, ignoring my interruption. If this is some kind of pity outing, I'd rather be at home. It's not a pity outing, I said, horrified, and I'm sorry I haven't made more of an effort. It wasn't about you. She gave me a pointed look. Okay, maybe it was a little bit about you, I admitted. She let out a short, sharp laugh. What, you think I'm scary? Well, yes, I said, but it's more that you're always late. Another surprised bark of laughter. God, you're not from around here, are you? No, why? This honesty thing, she said. It's refreshing, so you didn't want to be friends with me because I'm not punctual. And you didn't want to be friends with me because I'm a bit uptight. I guessed. She chortled. No, it wasn't that. It was that you were so disgustingly happy. The divorce is still too fresh for me to be around someone with cartoon hearts floating around their head. I hadn't explicitly told anyone at work about the breakup, but when you cancel a 3-week honeymoon leave, people tend to figure it out. Well, I told her, even before all this, I didn't have cartoon hearts. Because of the uptightness, she joked. A small smile touched my lips. Because when people are always late, I assume they're not reliable, and I don't expect them to be interested in being close friends. She nodded thoughtfully. Fair, but for what it's worth, I'm always late because I have a kid. My friends can rely on me, but at the end of the day, Mulder comes first. Every time. If I was a closed book, then Ashley Rahimi had just handed me the key. Also fair, I said. So, she said, leaning forward again. Have I earned the origin story of this joke? I took a deep breath. There's something I haven't told anyone at the museum, I began. Something humiliating. Her jaw dropped. You cheated on your fiancé with Kabir. What? God, no. I looked around to make sure no one was listening. How do I know this story isn't going to be the hot new gossip at the museum by tomorrow morning? She considered for a moment. Have I ever told you anything about our intern Landon, other than your witness protection theory? Let's just say, she replied, his family could be the subject of a multi-season drama series. And yet, you know nothing. I'm good with secrets. Could be making that up. I could be, she said, but I'm not. Look, I'm a recent divorcee who spends most of her time with an 11-year-old. I'm not out here spreading rumors. I just really enjoy hearing about drama, sue me. I might, I said, a small smile playing on my lips. I've got it, she cried, slapping her hands on the bar. She dug in her oversized purse and pulled out her phone. I have a terrible rash on my back. I'll send you a picture. It can be your collateral. Please don't, I said, horrified. What if, I suggested, you just tell me something about yourself? She narrowed her eyes. An old-fashioned getting-to-know-you approach, how novel. Well, she said, thinking for a moment. My kid was conceived in the back of a Maruti 800 behind the IMCA. A snort of laughter escaped me. And she continued, warming to her theme, in 6th grade, the tissues I'd stuffed in my bra fell out while I was at the blackboard. Oh my God, I said, covering my face with my hands. And when Mulder was a baby, she went on, her voice softening, I was a complete wreck. I used to take him to a new mother's group at the local library, find the calmest-looking mum there and ask her to watch him while I went to the washroom. Then I'd lock myself in a stall, set a 5-minute timer and just sob. Ashley, that's heartbreaking, I said, my own eyes stinging with sympathetic tears. It was terrible, she agreed, laughing now, but it's what convinced me to go back to school and become an event coordinator. And Mulder is my best friend, so it was all worth it. Her story made my heart ache for my own mother, for the sacrifices she'd made, for the life she'd put on hold for me. I had always thought my family of 2 would one day expand, that I would have a house full of love and laughter. I had thought my mother would become the world's best grandmother. So, Ashley said, batting her eyelashes, have I earned some gossip? I took a long sip of water. I'm going to say this fast, and then I don't want to talk about it again. Got it. Rohan dumped me for his childhood best friend who was Kabir's girlfriend, and that's how we ended up living together. The words tumbled out in a rush. Her jaw dropped. And then, I added, my cheeks burning, I accidentally told Rohan that Kabir and I are dating, so we took that picture to make the lie more convincing. Ashley's mouth formed a perfect O of surprise. You're kidding? I buried my face in my hands. I'm not. I love it, she cried, her voice filled with delight. What do we love? I looked up to see Kabir setting down a flight of wine glasses in front of us. Your fake relationship, Ashley announced cheerfully. Well, I don't, I grumbled. Now there's no way out of it. When we break up, Rohan will get to be all smug and superior. No problem, Kabir said, pouring a small amount of white wine into each of our glasses. We just have to stay together until they break up. If they have kids, we have more kids. If they buy a dog, we buy a cuter dog. A perfect plan, I said dryly. He pushed the glasses towards us. Pinot Blanc, he said. It's crisp with a hint of pear. I'm kidding about the staying together part, by the way. You don't say, I replied, taking a sip. The wine tasted like a cool spring morning. What do you think? He leaned forward, his expression earnest. It tastes like springtime, I said, surprised by my own poetic description. He smiled. Exactly. I think there's something wrong with mine, Ashley said, a frown on her face. It just tastes like wine. Katia called out for Kabir from the other end of the bar. He glanced over his shoulder. A man with slicked back hair was drunkenly leaning over the counter, demanding something from her. Kabir excused himself and walked over to the man, his expression calm and polite, with a new hard edge to his eyes. So, Ashley said, turning back to me, what you're saying is your ex is a lunch swapper. What? He's the kid who's always looking over at the other kids' tiffin boxes, she explained. He's got a perfectly good aloo paratha from his mum, but he's always wondering if someone else has something better. It doesn't matter what's in his lunchbox. He'll always be tempted by the mystery of someone else's. And I'm the aloo paratha? I asked, a little offended. It's not about the paratha, babe, she said. It's about the swapper. Kabir returned carrying a cheese board. So, he said, setting it down in front of us. A bit of a problem. What, you ran out of cheese? I asked. He grimaced. Katia, she heard from Priya about my new girlfriend. Oh no, I groaned. She asked if it was me, didn't she? I said, a sinking feeling in my stomach. If I'm the new girlfriend. He nodded, a flush creeping up his neck. And you said yes. The flush deepened. I don't know what came over me. Ashley threw her head back and laughed, a loud, delighted sound. I love this so much, she said, clapping her hands together. I'm never lying again, I declared. Except, Kabir said, a teasing glint in his eyes, if Katia asks you if we're sleeping together, because if you tell her the truth, this is going to get very embarrassing. You told her we're sleeping together, I shrieked. No, Daphne, he said, rolling his eyes. Priya told her I'm living with my new girlfriend. Katia's a smart girl, she might connect the dots. How long until everyone in Castle knows about this? I groaned, burying my face in my hands. The paparazzi are probably on their way, he replied dryly. He poured us another taste of wine. This is the 2020 Chardonnay, by the way, a very misunderstood wine. Ah, Ashley cooed, clutching her heart. A misunderstood little wine. A bright flash made me jump. Ashley was holding her phone, a grin on her face. Ah, she said, looking at the screen. Your first candid couples photo. The man sitting next to her tapped her on the shoulder. If you want one of all 3 of you, he offered, I'd be happy to take it. Ashley nodded enthusiastically. She dragged her stool around to my other side, and Kabir leaned in over the bar, his chin resting on my shoulder. "Everyone say cheese," the man said with a wink. The night was descending into a surreal, wine-fueled chaos, and as the camera flashed, I had the distinct feeling that my quiet, orderly life was officially a thing of the past. Chapter 8. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of wine, cheese, and surprisingly good conversation. Ashley and her new friend, whose name turned out to be Vikram, were hitting it off spectacularly. So spectacularly, in fact, that by the time the cafe started to empty out, they were practically intertwined in the corner. "She okay to drive?" Kabir asked, emerging from behind the bar with his wallet and keys. "Oh, she's not drunk," I assured him. "She's just enthusiastic." At that moment, Ashley detached herself from Vikram and bounced over to us. "So," she said, her voice a conspiratorial whisper, "what are the chances you can get a ride home with Kabir?" I looked at him. He jingled his keys. "Fine by me." "Thank God." Ashley breathed, giving me a quick, firm hug that smelled faintly of vanilla and wine. "Don't make this weird at work, okay?" "What, the fact that I've now witnessed you practically taste-testing a stranger's tonsils?" "It was bound to happen eventually," she said, already turning back to Vikram. "Get home safe, lovebirds." "So," Kabir said, as we walked out into the cool night air. "Vikram's friend wasn't your type." I cringed, remembering my excruciatingly awkward attempt at conversation with Vikram's wingman, a man who seemed to communicate exclusively in business jargon. "I think I wasn't his type," I said. "He got a very urgent work-related text and had to leave. I saw him a few minutes later playing Candy Crush on his phone at the other end of the bar." "What a jerk," Kabir said, a small smile playing on his lips. In his defense, I admitted, "I'm terrible at small talk. I think I accidentally listed all my food allergies within the first 3 minutes." He held the door of his old, beat-up truck open for me. "What about milkshakes?" he asked as he climbed into the driver's seat. "What about them? Are you in the mood for one?" he said, "because I've been thinking about Big Chachas all night." "Who's Big Chacha?" I asked, a small laugh bubbling up. He shot me a look of mock horror. "You've never been to Big Chacha's drive-in?" He started the truck, and a classic Bollywood song from the 70s blasted from the speakers. "Get in, Ananya," he said, his voice filled with dramatic urgency. "We're correcting this egregious oversight immediately." Big Chacha's, it turned out, was a local institution. A brightly lit, retro-style drive-in that looked like it had been transported straight from a 1950s American movie and dropped in the middle of the Himalayas. The air was filled with the smell of frying potatoes and the sound of cheerful teenagers. "Chocolate mango milkshake and masala fries," Kabir ordered for both of us, without even looking at the menu. Trust me, the milkshake was a revelation, a perfect blend of sweet and tart that made my brain freeze and my taste buds sing. The fries were crispy, spicy, and utterly addictive. "So," Kabir said after a few minutes of blissful, silent eating, "what happened with the drunk guy at the bar?" "Oh, him," he said, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "He was just being a nuisance. It happens." "How did you handle it?" "I told him if he got in the taxi we'd called for him, we'd comp his drinks and not ban him for life." "Wow," I said, impressed. "You laid down the law, and you didn't even stop smiling." "Things go more smoothly when you don't let people get a rise out of you," he said, his voice quiet. "If you give them control over how you feel, they'll always use it." His words hit me with a surprising force. It was a philosophy not so different from my own, born from years of managing my expectations of my father. If you don't expect anything from people, they can't let you down. "So," he said, changing the subject, "what else should we do? Things you weren't allowed to do with Rohan." I rolled my eyes. It wasn't about being allowed, I don't know how to cook, and he did, so he cooked. "He was also a gym person, right?" Kabir asked, a teasing glint in his eyes. "We were a couple with gym memberships," I clarified. "And you went together," he pressed. "On a schedule, we did. It was one of the few things about our breakup that I didn't miss." "We were very organized," I said. "We did everything on a schedule." He gave me a knowing look. "Fine, yes," I admitted, feeling my cheeks flush. "We did that on a schedule too." "Nothing wrong with that," he said, and I couldn't tell if he was being sincere or just polite. Misreading my expression, he added, "No, we didn't have a schedule. But sometimes it felt like we were just living separate lives in the same house. I'm not anti-schedule. Just anti-whatever health food Rohan was into." He turned off the main road onto a dark, winding country lane. "Where are we going?" I asked, a flicker of unease in my stomach. I have another egregious oversight to correct, he said, his voice filled with a mysterious excitement. The first piece of advice anyone will give you for improving your life is going to big chachas. The second is going to the lake at night. Isn't the lake closed? He shot me a pitying look. Which lake have you been going to? The one with the paddle boats and the tourists. He pulled the truck over to the side of the road, behind two other parked cars. There was no sign, no trailhead, just a dark, silent forest. Is this private property? I asked, grabbing my half-eaten bag of fries and following him into the trees. It's a national park, he said. There are more well-known spots, but the best ones are the ones you have to be told about. We walked in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the crunch of pine needles under our feet. I feel really stupid, I finally said, my voice small, stopped and turned to face me. You're not stupid. His hand found my elbow, his touch sending a warm shiver through me. He told you to trust him, he said, his voice gentle. And you did. That's what you're supposed to do with people you love, they just don't always deserve it. He ducked his head to meet my eyes, a small, sad smile on his lips. Do you want to go back to the truck and listen to sad ghazals? I laughed, wiping a stray tear from my cheek. No, let's just see this lake. The trees began to thin, and the ground became sandy under my feet. We climbed a small dune, and then, suddenly, the world opened up. Below us, a wide expanse of silver beach stretched out, lapped by the dark, quiet waters of the lake. A handful of bonfires flickered in the distance, small pockets of warmth and light in the vast darkness. The sound of the water was a soft, rhythmic hush, a stark contrast to the crashing waves of the ocean. It was so peaceful, so beautiful, it took my breath away. Wow, I whispered. Second best beach in town, he murmured, his voice a low rumble beside me. Second best, I turned to him, feigning outrage. You brought me to your runner-up beach. No one knows about the other one, he joked. I can't just give away all my secrets on the first date. This isn't a date, I reminded him, a little too quickly. He just smiled, his eyes reflecting the starlight. We made our way down the dune and found a spot on the cool sand, away from the other fires. He pulled a blanket from the bag he'd been carrying and spread it out. We sat in comfortable silence, finishing our fries and milkshakes, the only sound the soft lapping of the water against the shore. After a few minutes, he pulled a pre-rolled joint from his pocket. You want some? He asked, holding it out to me. I hesitated. I wasn't a big smoker, but the voice in my head telling me to say no wasn't my own. It was Rohan's. And I was tired of hearing his voice in my head, so I took the joint and a long, slow drag. The smoke filled my lungs and a feeling of warm, fuzzy calm spread through me. Where do you go? He asked, his voice soft after a few minutes of shared silence. When you're not at home or at the museum? Nowhere, I said. I'm boring. You're not boring, he said. You're just a closed book. Ashley's words, echoed by this man I barely knew. Maybe they were right. Maybe I had spent so long building walls, I'd forgotten how to let anyone in. Honestly, I admitted, if I'm not at work, I'm usually just reading somewhere, the public library, the little cafe near my old apartment, and if I'm not reading, I'm probably just running errands. He was quiet for a long moment. That's what I'm realizing, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Now that Rohan's gone, there's not much left. Casoli was his town, his friends, his life. I just slotted myself into it. He's not taking this town, Kabir said, his voice firm. You're not worried about running into them? I asked. At the grocery store, at the post office. He shrugged. Are you thinking about leaving? The question hung in the air between us, heavy and unspoken. I had been thinking about it, dreaming about it. I could go back to Delhi, I said, more to myself than to him. Back to my old job, my old friends. But even as I said the words, I knew it wasn't true. My old life wasn't there anymore. It had been absorbed into Rohan's. Kavya was our friend. The brewery was our spot. It was all gone. What about Maryland? He asked, his head tilted in that curious dog-like way. My mother's there, I said. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the dark water. Don't go, he said, his voice so soft I almost didn't hear him. You moved here for him. Don't let him be the reason you leave too. He turned to me, his expression serious. Okay, he said, a new energy in his voice. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to be your tour guide. I'm not doing drugs with you, Kabir, I said, a small laugh bubbling up. Good to know, he replied, a grin spreading across his face. But that's not what I meant. I'm going to show you my casoli. We'll go out every Sunday, and if by the end of the summer you still want to leave, then you can go. You're serious, I said, a little stunned. You're going to spend your summer dragging a near stranger around just so she won't move away. "You're not a stranger," he said, his leg brushing against mine. "You're my serious, monogamous girlfriend, remember?" His eyes danced with amusement, then his expression softened. "I don't want you to move away," he said, his voice quiet. "I like you. You like everyone," I reminded him. He held my gaze, a small, unreadable smile on his lips. "Do you really think you have me all figured out?" Just then, his phone chimed. He pulled it out, his face illuminated by the screen. A frown creased his forehead. "Everything okay?" I asked. He hesitated for a moment. "Priya," my stomach tightened. "You two still talk?" "Not really," he said, his voice quiet. "Apparently Katia told her we were together at the roast tonight. And she messaged you about it." He nodded, his eyes still on the screen. "She says she's happy for us." "Well, that's good," I said, my voice dripping with a sarcasm I didn't try to hide. "Priya's happiness has always been my #1 priority." He looked up, a slow smile spreading across his face. The weed had made my heart feel soft and pliable, but my stomach was still a knot of anger. For myself and for this kind, gentle man who deserved so much better than a note on a coffee table. I held out my hand for his phone. He looked at me for a second, then dropped it into my palm. "Come here," I said, opening the camera. He scooted closer, his side pressing against mine. I held the phone out in front of us, turned on the flash, and leaned in. He put his arm around me, a small, rueful smile on his lips. At the last second, just as the picture snapped, I turned and kissed his cheek. His face turned towards mine, our noses almost touching. The flash had left bright spots dancing in my vision. "Just thought we could make Priya really, really happy," I said, my voice a little breathless. "Very thoughtful of you," he murmured, the corners of his mouth curving up. I could feel his breath, warm against my skin. The night was quiet, the air was cool, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't just pain or anger. It was something new, something fragile, and I was terrified of what it might become. Chapter 9. The following week passed in a strange, silent truce. Kabir and I returned to our separate corners of the tiny apartment, our brief, drunken camaraderie dissolving back into polite nods and monosyllabic exchanges. He had, with a dramatic flourish, scribbled Kasoli Tourism Board meeting on the Sunday column of the whiteboard calendar, but had added nothing else since. By the time my Saturday shift at the museum rolled around, I was convinced the whole tour guide idea had been nothing more than a weed and wine-fueled fantasy. I left for work before he was awake, the early morning air crisp and clean. I was early, as usual, so I treated myself to a hot chai from a little whitewashed cafe I'd never noticed before, its windows overflowing with hanging plants. It's funny how you can live in a place and never really see it. Walking, instead of driving, I noticed things I'd always missed. A small, tucked-away Montessori school in a Tudor-style house. A quirky little shop that seemed to sell both kites and smoking paraphernalia. And a crooked for sale sign in the overgrown garden of a charming, taffy green bungalow. It looked like something out of a storybook, a little wild and mysterious, and for a moment I allowed myself to daydream about what it would be like to live there. The day at the museum was a blur of activity. We were preparing for the big Pride Month exhibit, and it was all hands on deck. I spent the morning helping Harvey, the museum director, hang rainbow-colored banners and arrange display cases. "You seem brighter this week," he commented, his voice a low, gentle rumble. He was a kind, grandfatherly man who bore a striking resemblance to Morgan Freeman. "Sorry," I said quickly. "I'll try to be less bright," he chuckled. "It's a museum, Ananya. If you can't be a human here, where can you?" His kindness made me feel a fresh pang of guilt about my secret job search. "We're lucky to have you," he added, patting my shoulder. "Just keep bringing your whole heart to this place. That's all that matters." Later, I helped Ashley set up a display for a local artist, and she filled me in on her first date with Vikram from the cafe. Apparently, after dinner, he'd made her sit in his car in complete silence for 20 minutes while he finished listening to a Fish album. "I'm glad someone's enjoying this," she said, but I could tell she was enjoying the telling of the story. It was nice, feeling like we were becoming real friends. The highlight of my week, as always, was the Saturday afternoon history walk. It was a beautiful, sunny day, so we held it outside on the museum's lawn. As I began my story, scanning the circle of rapt little faces, I noticed someone approaching from the parking lot. It was Kabir. His face lit up in a grin when he saw me. He stopped just outside our circle, leaning against an old pine tree, and listened, a look of amused fascination on his face. I felt a ridiculous, self-conscious flush creep up my neck. I was in the middle of a story about a mischievous monkey king, and I was, of course, doing all the voices. When I finished, the parents gave their usual polite applause, but Kabir let out a loud, appreciative whistle, which immediately transformed the sleepy group of children into a horde of tiny, shrieking monkeys. A couple of the mothers shot him curious, slightly disapproving looks. He was blissfully oblivious, ambling towards me through the dispersing crowd. "I had no idea you could do that," he said, a wide grin on his face. "What read?" I asked as we walked back into the cool, quiet museum. "The voices," he clarified. "You were a very convincing monkey king." "You should hear my wicked queen," I said, a small smile playing on my lips. "I was just on my way to the roast," he said, "and I wanted to make sure we were still on for tomorrow. I would have texted, but I forgot my phone." "I wasn't going to hold you to that," I said, a little surprised. He scoffed. "It's on the calendar. It's practically legally binding." He looked between me and Ashley, who had just reappeared from the back office. "Should I expect you two at the roast tonight?" "I've got work to do for the Heritage Festival," I said. "And I'll be making pizza rolls for my son and his friends until dawn," Ashley added. "But he's at his dad's next Sunday if you guys want to do something then." "Should we expect Vikram too?" Kabir teased, leaning across the counter. Ashley shuddered dramatically. "No, we should not. Ananya can fill you in. I can't bring myself to speak of it again." "Too much fish," I explained. "What's wrong with fish?" Kabir wanted to know. "Nothing," Ashley said. "In moderation, but his apartment had a theme, and if you're 40 years old and your apartment has a theme, I just don't see it working out." "Well, shit," Kabir said, a look of mock horror on his face. "That rules out pretty much everyone I know." The next day, Kabir was 15 minutes late. "Sorry," he said when he finally walked into the apartment. The line at the cafe was really long. He held out a paper cup to me. I recognized the logo from the little cafe I'd been to the day before. "I don't really drink coffee," I said, feeling a little awkward. "It makes me jittery." His face fell. "You had one of their cups on your desk yesterday." "Chai," I explained. He tapped his temple as if making a mental note. "Right, chai." We drove out of town, away from the bustling market and the colorful colonial-era buildings, into the rolling green hills of the countryside. His heartbreak playlist was in full effect, a melancholic soundtrack to the beautiful scenery. After a few minutes, he pulled over to the side of the road, next to a small, hand-painted farm stand. Two elderly women in colorful saris were selling fresh vegetables. "When you said we were going shopping," I said, raising an eyebrow, "you meant for asparagus." He shot me an offended look. He said, "Is just phase one." We got out of the truck and walked over to the stand. "Well, hello there," one of the women called out, a wide, toothless grin on her face. "Back so soon?" "Of course," Kabir said. "Leela auntie, Jita auntie, this is my friend Ananya. Ananya, this is Leela and Jita." "Ananya is new to Kasauli," he explained, "and she's never had your asparagus." "Is that so?" Leela said, her eyes twinkling. She began to rummage through the crates. "Let me find you the best of the best." Jita leaned across the table and squeezed Kabir's arm. "How have you been holding up, Beta?" she asked, her voice soft. "I'm good, auntie," he said, his smile a little strained. "I'm good." "You're a good boy," she said, her voice firm. "You deserve to be happy." Leela handed me a large bunch of asparagus and Kabir held open a tote bag. He tried to pay, but she waved his money away. He shoved a 50-rupee note into their tip jar anyway, to their loud protestations. As we walked back to the truck, Jita called after me, "You take care of our boy, he's one of the good ones." "I've been picking up on that," I said, a small, genuine smile on my face. "You weren't kidding about the effect you have on the elderly," I said as we drove away. He laughed. "They don't like me," he said. "They like my money. I spend a lot on their asparagus and their corn later in the season." "How much corn can one man eat?" I asked, incredulous. "It's not for me," he said. "We source from them." "We? The Kasauli roast," he explained. At my blank look he added, "I'm their buyer." "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, a note of amusement in his voice, "that our chef creates the menu and I find the best local ingredients for him. So I go to the butcher and the farm stands and the cheesemaker." "You have a cheesemaker on speed dial?" I asked, my eyes wide. "We text," he said, a grin spreading across his face. "When she has something special." "Oh," I said, shaking my head in disbelief. Who knew I was living with the most well-connected man in all of Himachal Pradesh? Our next stop was a cherry stand, run by a father and son duo. This time I insisted on paying. As soon as we got back in the truck, Kabir looked at me expectantly. Aren't you going to try one? Is this some kind of a thing for you? I asked, a blush creeping up my neck. I just want to know if you think they're as good as I do. I popped a cherry in my mouth. It was a burst of sweet, tart, juicy perfection. So juicy, in fact, that a trickle of pink juice ran down my chin. An involuntary mmm escaped me. Grinning, Kabir grabbed a napkin and gently wiped my chin, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through me. He spat his cherry pit into an empty cup and held it out for me to do the same, a strangely intimate gesture that made my insides feel like they were doing somersaults. Best cherry you've ever had, he guessed. I didn't even know I liked cherries until right now, I admitted. Where are you from again? I asked as we drove on. He hesitated for a moment. Illinois. And how did you end up here? Followed a girl, he said, his voice quiet. Priya, he shook his head. My ex before her, Danny, she's the cousin of our chef at the roast. He offered her a job, so we moved here from Chicago. We broke up a few months later. She moved back. I stayed. So that's why you don't think I should leave, I guessed. Because you think there's a 1% chance Rohan and Priya will move away first. I told you, he said, his voice soft. I don't think you should leave because I don't want you to leave, and my happiness is very important. You heard Leela and Jita. Our final stop was a lavender farm, a beautiful, fragrant oasis of purple. We bought lavender shortbread and blueberry lavender lemonade from a small shop in a whitewashed cottage. As we were walking out to the patio, I saw him, a tall, golden-haired man getting out of a familiar BMW in the parking lot. Rohan. He was walking towards the shop, his eyes on the ground. Then he looked up. Our gazes locked. The warm, happy feeling in my stomach curdled into a cold, hard knot. He faltered, almost tripping over his own feet. Kabir followed my gaze, and a low curse escaped his lips. It was bad enough running into him, but running into him here, at this beautiful, secret place he'd never taken me to, felt like a deliberate, personal slap in the face. A cruel reminder that he had a whole life here that I was never a part of. He changed course, striding purposefully towards us. Shit indeed. Chapter 10, 76 days until I can leave. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, as Rohan approached. All three of us seemed to be holding our breath, waiting for someone else to make the first move. Hi, Rohan finally said, his voice tight. Hello, I managed, my own voice barely a whisper. Kabir remained silent, a stoic statue beside me. It was probably for the best. He was too inherently friendly to give Rohan the icy reception he so richly deserved. Rohan glanced around, looking for an escape, an excuse to be anywhere but here. Nice day for lavender, he offered lamely. Yeah, Kabir grunted, his voice flat. Rohan ignored him, his gaze fixed on me. I was wondering if we could talk for a second, Ananya. Kabir leaned in closer, a protective, grounding presence, a silent reminder that I didn't have to say yes. I'll meet you at the truck, I murmured to him. He held my gaze for a moment, a question in his dark eyes before nodding. He walked away without another word to Rohan, his shoulders set in a stiff, unyielding line. Another awkward silence descended. I pinched the inside of my palm, a small, sharp pain to keep myself from filling the void. So, Rohan said, his voice oozing a false concern that made my skin crawl. How are you? My jaw dropped. Seriously? A flicker of annoyance crossed his face before he schooled his features back into a mask of solemn regret. He glanced over his shoulder at the rusty truck and the man now leaning against it. Look, he said, his voice softening. I know I hurt you. I know what I did was terrible. A harsh, bitter laugh escaped me. Wow, that makes everything so much better. To his credit, he didn't get defensive. A crease appeared between his perfect eyebrows. I deserve that, but it doesn't change the fact that I care about you. I felt a sheet of ice spread through my veins, making it hard to breathe. And I know how much this must suck for you, he continued, his voice dripping with pity. Being here all alone. I'm not alone, I said, my voice sharp. I know, he said, his eyes flicking back to Kabir. And that's what I'm saying. It might seem easier to just be with someone, but you deserve better than that. I was speechless. All I'm saying is be careful, he said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone. That guy's a mess. I don't want to see him drag you down. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Do you know why he moved here? His own family doesn't even talk to him. He's a loser, Ananya. You can do so much better. A wave of angry protectiveness, sharp and unexpected, surged through me. Of course, I didn't know everything about Kabir. We'd only been roommates for a couple of months. But Rohan had asked me to marry him. He'd asked me to give up my entire life for him. He'd asked me to trust him and I had. And now he was standing here, looking at me with a mixture of worry and hope, as if he'd just saved me from some terrible fate. "You know what, Rohan," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Thank you for pulling me aside today." His face brightened with relief. "Always nice to be reminded," I continued, my voice dripping with ice, "that your ex really was as big of an asshole as you remember." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, his mouth agape. I strode across the sun-drenched parking lot to the man leaning against the truck, the man who had shown me more kindness in 2 months than Rohan had in 3 years. "You okay?" Kabir asked, his voice rough with concern as I reached him. Instead of answering, I threw my arms around his neck and pulled him into a desperate, clumsy hug. "Is he looking?" I whispered into his shoulder. Kabir nodded, his arms coming around me to hold me tight. "Can I kiss you?" A half-amused, half-scandalized smile spread across his face. "Okay." I leaned in, and he met me halfway. It was, without a doubt, one of the top 5 worst kisses of my life. I went in too fast, too hard, and he was clearly aiming for something chaste and performative. I ended up practically biting his lip, which made him laugh into my mouth, which in turn made me laugh. But then, just as quickly, he adjusted his approach, his hands gripping my hips, my jaw, and he kissed me for real. It was rough, impatient, and utterly electrifying. His mouth was cool from the lemonade, his breath tinged with lavender. His hand slid around to the small of my back, pulling me flush against him. His other hand tangled in my hair, his tongue finding mine. A thrill, sharp and hot, shot through me as he backed me up against the side of the truck, his hips pressing into mine. I felt him harden against me, and the shock of it gave way to a dizzying, confusing want. My hands found their way into his messy hair, and a small, needy sound escaped my throat. He drew back slowly, his breath coming in shallow gasps. His heart was racing against my chest. "How was that?" he asked, his voice a low, rough whisper. "Yeah," I managed, my own voice shaky. "Good. Is he still looking?" "Right." "Rohan," I glanced over Kabir's shoulder. He was gone. He'd either gone into the shop or driven away. A wave of heat, of pure, unadulterated embarrassment, washed over me. "No." Kabir's hands dropped from my jaw, my back. "Should we head out?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Yep," I squeaked, scrambling away from him and into the truck. It was a good thing we'd taken his car. I was in no condition to drive. We rinsed the cherries in the kitchen sink and ate them while we grilled the asparagus for our salad. We didn't talk about the kiss. I couldn't tell if he was even thinking about it. But every time I closed my eyes, I could feel his lips on mine, his hands on my body. It had been a performance, a desperate, vengeful act. But a small, treacherous part of me couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to kiss him for real. "You okay?" he asked, his voice breaking the silence. I looked up from the cucumber I was chopping. "Yep," he frowned. "You want to talk about it?" My heart skipped a beat. "Whatever he said to you," Kabir clarified. I scraped the chopped vegetables into the salad bowl. "He was just being a jerk." He was quiet for a long moment. "It's fine if you don't want to tell me." I hesitated, then the words tumbled out. "He said your family doesn't talk to you." The reaction was immediate. A flicker of shock, of hurt, in his dark eyes before he turned away, his shoulders tense. "He was just being an asshole," I said quickly. He nodded without looking at me. "Shit." I'd played right into Rohan's hands. I walked up behind Kabir and placed my hands on his shoulders, gently kneading the tight muscles. He let out a long, tired sigh. "Miles," I said, my voice soft. "My slip of the tongue from the source text feels natural here, a moment of intimacy and confusion. Let's keep it." "I mean, Kabir." He looked over his shoulder at me, a sad, tired look in his eyes. "I'm sorry," I said. "It's fine," he said, turning to face me. He took my wrists in his hands, his gaze on the floor. "I guess I'm just surprised Priya told him that. I barely even talked to her about it." I pressed my palms against his shoulders, trying to soothe the tension out of him. His thumbs moved back and forth over my wrists, a restless, nervous gesture. "It's true," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I don't really have a relationship with my parents. It is what it is. I can't change it. So what's the point of dwelling on it?" "Sometimes," I said, my voice gentle, "complaining about things, just having someone to listen, can make them feel a little less heavy." He finally met my eyes, a small, sad smile on his lips. "You are not a complainer." "Are you kidding?" I said. "My mother and I used to play a game called Whiny Babies. We'd take turns complaining about progressively smaller and more ridiculous things. Whoever had the whiniest complaint got to choose what we had for dinner." The corner of his mouth twitched. Sounds fun. It was, I said. Sometimes just knowing someone else sees your side of things can make all the difference. There's no sting, he said, his voice quiet. It's fine, I have my sister, she's my family. My own family history, my own complicated relationship with my father made my chest ache with a familiar hollow pain. His mention of his sister Julia felt like a small, bright spot in the darkness. The corner of his mouth hitched up. Priya's family, he said. His voice laced with a bitter irony was like something out of a Bollywood movie. Perfect. I sighed. Yeah, Rohan's too. Were you close? He asked. With his parents? My chest tightened. I thought so. His mother came wedding dress shopping with me and my mum. They had a Christmas stocking made for me with my name on it. They have so many traditions. I really wanted to be a part of it. Yeah, he said, his voice filled with a quiet understanding that made my eyes sting with unshed tears. He was still holding my wrists, his thumbs a soft, steady rhythm against my skin. It was a small, simple gesture, but in that moment it felt like an anchor in the storm of my emotions. He hadn't run away. He hadn't dismissed my feelings. He was just there, and for now, that was more than enough. Chapter 11 72 Days Until I Can Leave. It's inadvisable, under the best of circumstances, to develop feelings for your roommate. We were nowhere near the best of circumstances. I tried to push the memory of our kiss at the lavender farm to the farthest corner of my mind, but it wasn't easy. It lingered, a low, persistent hum beneath the surface of my thoughts. A few nights later, I went to the kitchen for a glass of water and found Kabir there, in the dim light of the moon, wearing nothing but a pair of athletic shorts. The collection of tattoos splashed across his chest were dark, mysterious shapes, and I found myself overcome with a sudden, insatiable curiosity. A perfectly balanced set of scales, an old-fashioned crescent moon, a small, intricate lotus flower. Hey, he said, his voice a low, sleepy rumble. I guiltily jerked my gaze back to his face. Nope, I squeaked, and fled back to my room before I remembered that I had in fact needed water. Our first Sunday tour of Kasauli was to the famous Monkey Point, a Hanuman temple at the highest peak of the town. The view was breathtaking, a panoramic vista of the snow-capped Himalayan range. It was also, as Kabir had gleefully informed me, only accessible by a steep, winding climb that left my legs feeling like jelly. You'll be fine, he'd promised as he handed me a bottle of water. Anything that requires this much physical exertion, I panted, is probably not worth doing. He just grinned, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Or maybe, he'd said, his voice a low, teasing murmur. Everything worth doing comes with a little bit of a climb. His winsome smile had sent a thrill up my spine, a dangerous, exhilarating spark. The next Sunday was a trip to a nearby village famous for its handmade woolen shawls. We wandered through the colorful market, and he insisted on buying me a beautiful, soft pashmina in a deep shade of indigo. He draped it around my shoulders, his fingers brushing against my neck, and for a moment, in the crowded, noisy market, it had felt like we were the only two people in the world. That night back at the apartment, we made pizza from scratch. A simple margarita for me and a more adventurous pesto, artichoke, and goat cheese concoction for him. While the pizzas were in the oven, I took a shower. When I came back to the kitchen, dressed in my favorite silk pajamas, he was just taking them out. Perfect timing, he said, his eyes meeting mine. Then he did a double take. I followed his gaze and realized, to my horror, that my pajama top was damp, clinging to me in a way that was far from modest. My nipples, with a sense of timing that was nothing short of cruel, chose that moment to stand at attention. I quickly crossed my arms over my chest. His eyes snapped back to my face, a dark flush creeping up his neck. I'll grab plates, I announced, my voice a little too loud. I'll get drinks, he coughed out. In the tiny kitchen we collided, the plates I was holding flattened between us. His hands came up to steady me, his fingers brushing against my collarbones. We both said at the same time. We ate our pizza on opposite ends of the sofa, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. I took a bite of his artichoke pizza. It was a symphony of flavors, rich and tangy and utterly delicious. There it is, Kabir said, a slow smile spreading across his face. I opened my eyes. I hadn't even realized I'd closed them or that a small, appreciative moan had escaped my lips. The signature Ananya moan, he teased. I flushed. It's been a long time since I've had pizza. Right, he said, his eyes glimmering. The Rohan diet. He tilted his head, his gaze softening. So what else should we do now that you're single? I nearly choked on my pizza. A knot of heat slid down into my stomach. I could feel the phantom sensation of his hands on my back, his lips on mine. What do you mean? I asked, my voice a little shaky. I mean, he said, his voice a low murmur, things your ex didn't like that you can do now. Somehow, that sounded even more suggestive. Like eating pizza, I stammered, determined to keep things platonic. Right, he said. Or sunrise paragliding, I've always wanted to do that. Priya wasn't into paragliding, I asked, surprised. She wasn't into sunrises, he said, but we're not talking about them, we're talking about us. The word us sent a fresh wave of heat through me. Well, I said, trying to sound casual, I've never been sunrise paragliding, but I'd be willing to try. Really, I won't be good at it, I warned. But I'll try. What else? He murmured, his hand coming to rest on my knee, his touch sending a bolt of lightning through me. I ignored it. I always wanted to learn how to bake, I admitted. But you were living with a health food fanatic, he finished for me. I cracked a smile, and he did too. His hand was still on my knee, and it felt like a brand. His gaze flickered down to my mouth, then back to my eyes. What about you? I blurted out, desperate to change the subject. He thought for a moment. Action movies, he said. It's probably been 3 years since I've seen a good action movie. Rohan hadn't liked them either. Me too, I said. So maybe we should, he said, his voice a low, suggestive rumble. Maybe right now, I said, needing a distraction, something to look at besides his mouth, something to think about besides his hand on my knee. He flashed a brilliant smile. Maybe right now. I'm so happy for you, honey, my mother said, her voice a little breathless. She'd called me on her walk home from her Zumba class. I was lying on the floor of my room, staring at the ceiling, a mug of chai balanced on my stomach. Happy for me, I echoed. Happy for me wasn't the usual response to a story about a library patron trying to smuggle a taxidermied squirrel out of the museum. I mean, she clarified, I'm glad you're making friends, and that you're getting out. Your life can be full and happy without a man in it. Take it from me. I wasn't so sure about that, but I didn't want to argue. I hadn't told her about Kabir, about our strange, complicated living situation, about the kiss that had felt like a performance but had also felt like so much more. She was too perceptive. She would pick up on my rebound crush in a heartbeat, and I didn't want to give it any more oxygen than it already had. I've got things under control, I promised her. The action movies became a ritual. Every night for the next week, we'd sit on opposite ends of the sofa and lose ourselves in a world of car chases, explosions, and quippy one-liners. It was a surprisingly effective distraction from the low-level hum of attraction that was always present between us. On Friday night, Kabir's colleague Katia needed some extra hours, so he was home. Another film? He asked, leaning against my doorframe. His hair was wet from a shower, his beard a little untamed. I was lying on the floor of my tiny room and the angle was not ideal. I scrambled to my feet, knocking over my chai in the process. He returned a moment later with a towel which he threw at my face. Great catch, he said, a grin on his face. Thanks, I mumbled, mopping up the spill. When's showtime? Whenever you're ready. Give me 5 minutes. I'll make popcorn, he said. 5 minutes later, we were settled on the sofa, a large bowl of popcorn between us. There's just something about a movie where things blow up, he said. That makes me feel like everything's going to be okay. At my laugh, he stretched his leg out until his foot was resting against my thigh. Hey, he said, his voice soft. That was a real one. I turned to face him, pulling my legs up onto the cushions. A real what? A real laugh, he said. You have your polite little chuckle, and then you have that weird, deep chortle when you actually think something's funny. It's not a polite laugh, I protested. It's a display of mild amusement. I never fake anything. He gave me a look that made my skin tingle. So the mild amusement laugh is for when I'm just mildly amusing, he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. And the chortle is reserved for when you're actually funny, I said. Without warning, he grabbed my ankles and pulled me down the sofa, until my legs were draped across his lap. Fine, I said, my heart doing a frantic little dance in my chest. You're actually funny a lot of the time. And the chortle is, he pressed, his face hovering just inches from mine. I think it's when I'm relaxed, I admitted. I've always been self-conscious about my laugh. Don't be, he said, his voice a low, rough whisper. He took my wrists and planted my hands on the sides of his face, a playful, goofy gesture that made my heart ache. It's so fucking cute. This was the most we had touched since the kiss. Every point of contact was a tiny explosion of electricity. I was a bundle of buzzing nerves and a want so sharp it was almost painful. His gaze lifted from my mouth to my eyes. Shit, sorry, he said, his voice suddenly hoarse. I'm sorry. He started to pull away, but I caught his wrists, keeping him close. "It's fine," I said, my own voice barely a whisper. "It doesn't have to be weird." "I think it's just because we kissed," he said, his eyes dark and unreadable. "I think so too." We stayed like that for a long moment, the silence between us charged with a tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. "I've been trying not to think about it," he admitted. Knowing he'd been thinking about it at all sent a fresh wave of heat through me. "Same, I managed to get out. I should have let him go. I should have put some space between us. But instead, my hands were moving up his arms, over his shoulders, into his hair. He leaned into my touch, his own hand coming to rest on my waist. Our mouths hovered, inches apart. The first brush of his lips was soft, tentative, but then my hands were sliding down his back and he was shifting, lowering himself over me, and the kiss deepened, all our unspoken want and confusion and loneliness pouring into it. His hand found my knee, pulling it up to his hip, and stars exploded behind my eyelids. My hips tilted up to meet his, and all my carefully constructed walls came crashing down. I wanted him. It was a simple, undeniable truth, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. Chapter 12. The kiss was a storm, a whirlwind of pent-up emotion and unspoken desire. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a confession. My hands moved down to his hips, and he let out a low, hungry sound as his mouth moved from my lips to my jaw, his teeth scraping gently against my skin. I arched into him, a gasp escaping my lips. This was no longer just making out, this was a prelude. "We really shouldn't have sex," I hissed, the words a desperate attempt to cling to some semblance of rationality. "I know," he agreed, his lips moving to my throat. "I'm not ready for that," I said, more for my own benefit than his. "Way too soon," he murmured, but his hand was already moving up from my hip, his fingertips tracing the curve of my breast. He unbuttoned the top button of my shirt, his fingers brushing against the sensitive skin of my chest. I shivered, a wave of pure, unadulterated want washing over me. I twisted under him, guiding his hand, and he let out a soft "thank fuck" as his fingers closed over my breast. We shifted, a clumsy, fumbling dance on the narrow sofa, and I almost fell off. He caught me, pulling me back against him, and we were both laughing, a wild, hysterical sound. "I'm out of practice," he said, his voice husky. "Making out on couches." We were only a few feet from either of our bedrooms. If we went any closer to a bed, I knew what would happen. I wanted it to happen. I wanted it so badly it was a physical ache in my chest. But I also wanted, just a little bit more, to not completely detonate my already precarious living situation. He hauled me up on top of him, my knees straddling his hips. His eyes were dark and intense, and the only thing I could think about was him. He pulled a pillow out from under his head and tossed it on the floor. Then he was kissing me again, his mouth moving over my chest, his tongue a hot, wet brand against my skin through the thin fabric of my shirt. A sound, borderline inhuman, escaped my throat. His hand slid down my waist, and he rocked his hips against mine, a slow, deliberate rhythm that sent a jolt of electricity straight to my core. "You're so sexy," he rasped, the words a rough caress against my skin. It wasn't a word I was used to hearing. "Cute, pretty, sometimes beautiful, never sexy." "You are too," I whispered back, my voice shaky. His hand moved between us, his palm pressing against me through my pajama bottoms. My eyes fluttered closed. I pushed into his touch, leaning over him, my teeth sinking gently into the skin of his neck. I felt like a different person, someone bold and uninhibited. "Ananya," he murmured against my ear. It came out as a high-pitched, quivery sound. "I know we said no sex," he said, his hand still moving. A slow, delicious torture. "But can I touch you?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. He slipped his hand inside my pajama bottoms, his fingers finding me, and I gasped, my hips arching into his touch. "I love the sounds you make," he rasped, and in that moment, all thoughts of consequences, of propriety, of the complicated mess our lives had become, vanished. All that was left was this. Him, me, the low, urgent rhythm of our bodies. I fumbled with the button of his jeans, and he helped me, his own fingers clumsy. A second later, my hand was around him, his was on me, and he was moaning too, a sound so raw and real it made my own want sharpen into a desperate, undeniable need. His phone on the coffee table started buzzing. We both ignored it. He kissed me harder, deeper, our bodies moving with a wild, frantic energy. The phone rang out, then started again. He sat up, pulling me with him, his mouth never leaving mine. Another part of me, a more sensible, more cautious part, wanted to slow down, to savor this, but that part had already lost the battle. I was on the edge, my hands digging into his back, his hand between my thighs, and then I was crying out. A wave of pure, unadulterated pleasure crashing over me, and he was shuddering against me, and for a few perfect, blissful seconds the world fell away. His phone started ringing again. "Shit," he said, his voice a rough scratch. He leaned over and grabbed it. The name Julia flashed on the screen. "Shit," he said again, a different kind of shit this time. Not a "let me throw my phone into the sea so we can get back to this shit," but a "I really should have answered my phone the first time" shit. "I'm sorry," he said, gently sliding me from his lap. "It's okay." The words came out too loud, too bright. The sudden absence of his warmth, his weight, left me feeling cold and exposed. "It's my sister," he said, his eyes filled with a worried frown. "Wouldn't call this many times unless it was an emergency." "Of course, an emergency," the real world crashing back in. "Of course," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Yeah, you should take it." I was already buttoning my shirt, pulling myself back together, trying to rebuild the walls he had so effortlessly demolished. I tried not to eavesdrop, but the apartment was small, and his voice, though low, was tinged with a frustration I'd never heard before. No, I mean, obviously I want you to," he was saying. "It's just shit, Julia, just ask me next time. Don't pretend you're asking me when it's already a done deal." He emerged from his room a few minutes later, looking exhausted. "Everything okay?" I asked, muting the TV. He ran a hand through his hair. "My sister can be impulsive." "Is she okay?" He let out a short, humorless laugh. "She's at the airport, in Chandigarh, the airport closest to us." "What?" I said. "Why, she says," he said, his voice laced with a weary disbelief, "that she's here to help me take my mind off things." He sighed. "Something else is going on. She's not fly across the country with no warning spontaneous." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a helpless apology. "She's already here, so if it's okay with you, I'm going to go pick her up. We don't have to let her stay all week. I can get her a hotel." "Kabir, hey," I said, cutting him off. "Of course she can stay here." I tried to inject a warmth I didn't feel into my voice. "Unless you want me to say no so you don't have to be the bad guy. In which case, absolutely not." A small, grateful smile touched his lips. "She's going to give me so much shit for this beard. The I'm moving to the woods to become a hermit beard." I teased. "Why would she have a problem with that?" "Will you pretend you like it?" he asked, a playful glint in his eyes. My heart gave a painful squeeze. "That's what friends are for," I said, my voice a little too bright. "Right," he said, his smile fading. "Friends." He hesitated for a moment as if he wanted to say something else, but then he just shook his head and walked to the door. "I should go." After he left, I sank onto the sofa, the silence of the apartment pressing in on me. Friends, that's what we were, just friends. I had told him it was too soon, that I wasn't ready, and he had agreed. He had pulled back. He had done the smart, sensible thing. So why did it feel like a mistake? Why did it feel like I had just pushed away the one good thing that had happened to me in months? The answer, I knew, was complicated. It was a tangled mess of heartbreak and fear and a deep-seated distrust of my own feelings. I was a mess. He was a mess. We were two broken people trying to navigate the wreckage of our lives. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was a bad idea. But as I sat there, in the quiet darkness, another thought, a small, treacherous whisper, made its way into my mind. Maybe, just maybe, two broken pieces could fit together to make something whole. The thought was terrifying and hopeful, and it filled me with a strange, unfamiliar ache. An ache that felt a lot like love. And I knew, with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty, that I was in very, very big trouble.